A rib comes out of the sandstone before the animal comes back. At first it is only a curve in pale rock, a darker line under the dust, something a visitor might mistake for a root or a crack if the quarry wall were not full of them. Then the eye adjusts. The curve becomes bone. The bone becomes part of a chest. The chest belonged to an animal that once breathed the air of a Jurassic floodplain, somewhere in the western interior of North America, before there were grasses underfoot or flowers beside the water. The Morrison Formation is often introduced through giants, Diplodocus stretching across museum halls, Apatosaurus with legs like pillars, Brachiosaurus lifting its head into a canopy no human eye ever saw. Those animals deserve their size in the imagination, because the ground really did carry them. But the formation is more than the story of enormous bodies. It is a record of rivers, dry seasons, turtles, ferns, insects, small mammals, crocodile relatives, wounded predators, plant beds, footprints, teeth, and bones scattered through mudstone like a long sentence that was never meant for us. To stand before a Morrison quarry is to face a crowd, not a monument. The bones are not arranged like a parade. They overlap. They disappear behind one another. Vertebrae twist through the stone. Limb bones lie at angles that belong less to living anatomy than to water, decay, trampling, and burial. The great sauropods are there, but around them is the rest of the world that allowed them to exist. The channel sand, the shrinking pools, the plants that held the banks, the small animals moving through shadows too low to reach a museum ceiling. This is the part of the Jurassic that is easy to miss. A giant skeleton can make the past feel simple, as if a whole landscape can be understood by measuring one femur. But ecosystems are never that simple. A sauropod needed leaves, and those leaves needed roots, soil, rainfall, and season. A predator needed prey, but it also needed weakness, opportunity, cover, and a place where its own body could fail. A small mammal needed darkness. A turtle needed mud. A fern needed water close enough to touch its roots before the dry weeks returned. If lost Jurassic worlds are what bring you back to Jurassical, subscribing keeps the next journey close. The Morrison Formation was laid down during the late Jurassic, across a broad region that now includes parts of Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, Montana, New Mexico, Oklahoma, South Dakota, and beyond. The modern map makes these places look fixed. Dry parks, badlands, canyons, highways, fences, museum signs. In the Jurassic, the same region was lower, warmer, and farther south. The Rocky Mountains as we know them had not risen. Instead, broad basins received sediment from rivers that crossed open floodplains and carried the remains of plants and animals into places where they could be buried. The rocks themselves are not dramatic in the way bones are dramatic. Mudstone, siltstone, sandstone, thin limestones. Greenish beds, red beds, pale bands that weather into slopes. Yet those ordinary layers are the reason the world is visible at all. A river channel preserves one kind of death. A floodplain pond preserves another. A soil horizon preserves a pause, a time when sediment stopped arriving and plants pushed roots into the ground. Each layer is a condition. Each condition favors certain remains and erases others. The Morrison was not one single habitat spread flat across time. It was a long record, built over millions of years. Some areas were wetter, some were drier, some were close to channels that flooded often, others sat farther away, where soil cracked under heat and vegetation thinned between watercourses. Even within one valley, a dinosaur could move from a shaded river margin into open ground, from ferns to low conifers, from mud soft enough to take a footprint to sediment hard enough to leave no trace at all. That is why the title Beyond the Giants matters. The giants were not separate from the smaller life around them. They were made possible by it. A sauropod herd was not just a herd, it was a moving force that changed plant height, trampled seedlings, opened pathways, broke banks and left dung that insects and other animals could exploit. Their bodies shaped the landscape, but the landscape shaped them first. Imagine a dry season morning near a Morrison River. The water has pulled away from its highest banks, leaving shelves of damp mud cracked at the edges. A turtle rests, half buried near a shallow pool. Ferns are browned at their tips. Conifer needles gather in drifts under a narrow line of trees. Farther out, the floodplain opens into heat and dust. Somewhere behind the screen of vegetation, a small ornithopod lifts its head and listens. The air does not carry birdsong as you know it. True birds existed by the late Jurassic, but they were still rare, small, and early in their history. The sky belongs more visibly to pterosaurs, their wings made of membrane rather than feathers. Their bones light enough that the fossil record keeps them only when luck is unusually generous. Insects make much of the background noise. Wind moves through needles and fronds. A sauropod steps somewhere upriver, presses water from mud, with a sound too low to last. The plants are the first great difference. No grassland spreads to the horizon. No flowers brighten the bank. No broad flowering trees shade the channel. The vegetation is older in design. Conifers make the taller architecture. Cycads stand low and stiff, with crowns of tough leaves. Ginkgo relatives drop fan-shaped leaves when seasons shift. Ferns gather where moisture persists. Horsetails grow in wet margins, jointed stems rising from mud, as if the ground itself is remembering a much older world. For the herbivores, this plant world required bodies built for persistence. Much of the foliage was tough. Many leaves carried resins, fibers, and chemical defenses. There were no soft grasses to crop in endless meadows. Feeding meant stripping, nipping, swallowing, grinding in the gut, fermenting slowly, and moving where the plant community allowed. Some dinosaurs solved the problem with immense digestive systems. Others chewed more carefully. Some stayed low. Some reached high. The ecosystem divided itself vertically, from mud-level horsetails to the upper conifer canopy. Camarasaurus was one of the more common sauropods in many Morrison deposits, and its skull shows a different feeding style from the long, slender-headed diploticids. The head was deeper, the teeth were stronger and broader. It may have cropped tougher branches or worked different parts of the vegetation. The details remain debated, but the larger point is clear. Not all giants used the same world in the same way. Even among the enormous animals, the Morrison was divided into diets, heights, roots, and habits. Diplodocus carried another solution. Long neck, long tail. A lighter build than some other sauropods. Teeth grouped toward the front of the jaws, like a comb made for stripping rather than chewing. Its body has often been imagined beside open floodplains and low vegetation, though it may have fed across several heights depending on posture and plant availability. Its tail, drawn into a thin end, may have been used for display, communication, or defense, but the living animal was not a diagram. It was muscle, skin, heat, hunger, and movement. Apatosaurus had a different weight to it. The bones are heavier, the neck powerfully built, the body more massive. In a museum, it can seem almost still by nature, too heavy to belong to motion. But the living animal moved because it had to. It followed water, food, shade, and perhaps the habits of others. Its young were vulnerable. Its adults were not invincible. A giant body protects against many predators, but not against drought, disease, exhaustion, or a riverbank that gives way under too much weight. Brachiosaurus, rarer in the Morrison record than the more familiar sauropods, presents the world at another height. Longer forelimbs, shoulders raised, neck lifted. A high browser, or at least an animal well suited to reach where others could not. In a landscape without flowering trees, that reach might have found conifer foliage, seed plant crowns, and branches that stood beyond the daily reach of lower feeders. Its rarity in the rock may reflect ecology, preservation, geography, or all three at once. These animals are the visible pillars of the Morrison. Yet the formation becomes more alive when the camera lowers. Under the shadow of sauropods lived animals that could vanish beneath a fallen branch. Lizards ran between plant stems. Early mammals nosed through debris after dark. Crocodile relatives waited near water. Frogs and salamanders occupied damp places where the dry season had not yet closed its hand. Fish moved through channels that might, months later, become isolated pools. Small fossils are harder to find because small bodies are easier to lose. A sauropod femur can survive weathering, transport, and burial in ways a mammal jaw cannot. Thin pterosaur bones collapse. Frog bones scatter. A lizard skull can disappear into sediment and remain invisible until a preparator notices a shape under magnification. This means the Morrison world we inherit is biased toward the large, but the living ecosystem was never biased that way. Most of the action happened at small scales. A tooth no wider than a fingernail can change the scene. A mammaliform molar from the Morrison does not announce itself like a dinosaur skeleton. It sits in a tray, delicate and precise, with cusps that tell of crushing insects, cutting soft tissues, or working mixed food. From such teeth, paleontologists infer diet, lineage, and sometimes behavior. The animal that owned it may have lived its life in nights, in burrows, in root tangles, hearing the movements of animals too large to see safely. Docodon and its relatives belong to that quieter record. These were mammaliaforms rather than modern mammals in the ordinary sense, but they carried many mammalian traits. Complex teeth, small bodies, likely fur. Lives lived close to cover. Their world was not empty simply because they were small. It was dense with odor, vibration, warmth, and danger. A footprint made by a sauropod could become a temporary basin. A fallen cone could shelter insects. A carcass could feed an entire hidden community long before the large scavengers finished tearing it open. Frutofosser, known from the Morrison region, gives another glimpse into small specialization. Its skeleton suggests digging adaptations, and its teeth have been compared to those of animals that feed on colonial insects. If that interpretation is right, then the Morrison floodplain had more than giant browsing and predatory pursuit. It had animals probing soil, breaking into nests, working underground food sources. The ground beneath the dinosaurs was active. It was not simply the surface they walked on. Other small mammaliaforms show that the Jurassic mammal story was not a single shadow. Some were probably insectivorous. Some may have been more omnivorous. Some were climbers. Some were diggers. Many remain known from fragments, and fragments require caution. A jaw does not preserve a whole life, but it preserves enough to show that mammals were not waiting passively for the dinosaurs to vanish. They were already experimenting, already occupying narrow, difficult, durable ways of living. Night changes the Morrison. The heat leaves the mud. The outlines of cycads become darker than the sky. Pterosaurs settle, or move as silhouettes if they remain active near water. Insects call from low plants. A small mammal crosses a patch of open ground in short, urgent movements, stopping beneath a piece of driftwood before continuing. Above it, the stars are not modern stars in modern positions, but the animal does not need astronomy. It needs cover. It needs food. It needs to survive until morning. At the water, crocodile relatives complicate the simple picture of dinosaurs as the only ruling reptiles. The Morrison has yielded forms that lived in and around channels, ponds, and floodplains. Some were small, some were more aquatic. They were not all copies of modern crocodiles. Jurassic crocodiliforms included animals with different limb proportions, skull shapes, and likely habits. They remind us that the Mesozoic was not a dinosaur monopoly. It was a reptile world with many branches sharing the same light. A small crocodiliform near a drying pool would not have needed drama to be dangerous. It could wait where thirsty animals came close. It could feed on fish trapped by receding water. It could take frogs, lizards, hatchlings, carrion. Its teeth and jaw were part of an ecosystem of opportunity, one that rewarded patience as much as speed. The Morrison floodplain had many places where an animal did not need to be large to matter. Turtles were among the more familiar shapes in that unfamiliar world. A turtle carapace in Jurassic sediment feels strangely modern because the body plan is so recognizable. Shell above, shell below, limbs withdrawn or extended. Slow movement near water. Yet these turtles belong to lineages with their own vanished histories. Their presence tells of ponds, channels, wet ground, and the kind of sedimentary settings where shells could settle, be buried, and wait. When a turtle died in a floodplain pond, its shell might preserve more readily than the bones of a small mammal or pterosaur. But even a shell can be moved, broken, scavenged, scattered. Fossilization is not a gentle archive. It is a chain of accidents. Death must occur in the right place. Burial must happen quickly enough. Chemistry must cooperate. Erosion must later expose the rock without destroying the fossil. Then someone has to notice. Frogs and salamanders bring the Morrison down to dampness. They needed water not as scenery, but as condition. Their bones point to wet pockets within a broader seasonal landscape. A semi-arid climate does not mean a lifeless desert. It means contrast. Water in one month and dust in another. Floodplain ponds that teem for a time and then shrink. Channels that carry fish and then isolate them. Damp refuges where small amphibians can persist while large animals walk past without knowing they are there. Fish in Morrison channels belong to rivers that were not permanent everywhere. In some places, seasonal flow connected pools and floodplain lakes. In others, receding water may have trapped fish in basins that became crowded, warm, low in oxygen, and easy for predators to exploit. A dying pool is not only a place of suffering. It is a concentration of life. Crocodiliforms, turtles, pterosaurs, small theropods, and larger animals could all be drawn to the same shrinking margin. Invertebrates are often left out because they do not fill museum halls in the same way. Yet insects, clams, snails, ostracods, crayfish-like forms, and other small animals helped operate the Morrison world. They broke down plant matter. They fed fish. They fed frogs. They fed mammals. Some lived in mud, some in water, some in wood. A fallen conifer was not simply dead timber. It was habitat, food, shelter, and chemistry waiting to be changed by smaller mouths. The plant litter under a Morrison forest edge would have held more life than a passing sauropod could understand. Beetles and other insects worked among needles and fronds. Fungal decay changed wood into softer material. Small reptiles hunted in brief bursts. Mammaliaforms followed scent trails. Moisture lingered beneath debris after exposed ground dried. The giants were present above this world, but they were not the whole world. Their footsteps crossed a surface already crowded with lives measured in centimeters. Among the small reptiles, sphenodontians are especially useful reminders that the past preserved lineages now reduced to near invisibility. Their modern relative, the tuatara, survives only in New Zealand, but in the Mesozoic such animals were much more widespread. In the Morrison, small jaws and skull parts suggest quick, low predators among leaf litter and rocks. They belong to a reptile diversity that has mostly vanished from modern landscapes. Lizards too were present, though often in fragments. Their fossils tell of tiny skulls, delicate limbs, and bodies that likely warmed on exposed patches before darting back into shade. To a large dinosaur, they would have been nearly irrelevant. To small predators, they were food. To paleontologists, they are evidence that the Morrison ecosystem had texture. Not just the main actors, but the constant movement of small vertebrates in the spaces between trunks, stones, roots, and bones. A small theropod moves through this world differently from Allosaurus. Its body is light, its steps quick, its head turning often. It is not built to threaten an adult sauropod or face a stegosaurus tail. It hunts what it can catch. Lizards, mammals, hatchlings, insects, perhaps carrion when the chance appears. Ornitholestes has often been placed in this small predator role, though the details of its habits remain uncertain. Its importance is not in spectacle, but in scale. Small predators are common in living ecosystems because small prey is common. The Morrison would have needed them. A food web made only of giant herbivores and giant carnivores cannot work. Energy has to move through many body sizes, insects into mammals, lizards into small theropods, fish into crocodiliforms, juvenile dinosaurs into predators too small to challenge adults. Every tier supports another, and the fossil record gives us only partial windows into that layered economy. Coelurus, Tanicolagrius, Marchosaurus, Stoxosaurus, and other lesser-known theropods are names that rarely carry the fame of Allosaurus. Some are fragmentary. Some are difficult to place. Some represent animals whose full bodies are still partly guessed from relatives. But uncertainty does not make them unimportant. It makes them honest. The Morrison Predator Guild was not a single silhouette. It was a range of hunters, scavengers, opportunists, and specialists, sharing a landscape where every carcass became a temporary center of gravity. Allosaurus is still there, of course, because beyond the giants does not mean without the famous predators. It means seeing them in context. Allosaurus was abundant in many Morrison deposits, and its bones show injuries, healed breaks, and the hard cost of predatory life. A large carnivore is not a monster outside ecology. It is an animal that fails often, starves sometimes, risks injury every time prey fights back, and depends on the weakness and availability of other animals. A healed wound in a predator bone says the fight did not end in clean drama. The animal was hurt and lived. It may have limped, fed less efficiently, lost status, changed hunting grounds, or scavenged more often while healing. Fossils preserve damage without the sound of the event. A puncture, a fracture, a swollen ridge of remodeled bone. From that quiet evidence, a whole season of pain can be inferred, carefully, without pretending to know every detail. Stegosaurus gives the Morrison one of its most recognizable shapes, but even here the story is more subtle than a row of plates and a spiked tail. The plates may have served display, species recognition, temperature exchange, or a combination of functions. The tail spikes were more direct. They could wound. They could turn the rear of the animal into a dangerous zone. This mattered in a world where large predators approached with teeth, but also with caution learned from failed attempts. Hesperosaurus, another stegosaur from the Morrison, shows that even the plated dinosaurs were not a single fixed design. The shapes and arrangements varied. Evolution was not trying to make an icon. It was working through bodies, populations, and pressures. A plate could be larger or smaller. A spike could angle differently. A lineage could favor display, defense, thermoregulation, or some blend that worked well enough for a time before conditions changed. Armored dinosaurs in the Morrison also included early ankylosaurs, such as Gargoyleosaurus and Mimorapelta. They did not yet have the full club-tailed form that later ankylosaurs would make famous, but they carried armor across their bodies in a different answer to predation. Low, protected, difficult to bite cleanly. Their fossils are another warning against treating the Morrison as just sauropods and theropods. The herbivore community was broader, and its defenses were varied. Camptosaurus moved through the Morrison with a different strategy: medium-sized, beaked, capable of bipedal movement, but not restricted to it. It could feed lower than sauropods, and probably processed plant material more orally than the giant swallowers. Its body suggests flexibility. It did not need to be enormous. It did not need plates. It needed awareness, movement, social behavior perhaps, and enough digestive efficiency to make a living among tough Jurassic plants. Dryosaurus was smaller and lighter, with long hind limbs that suggest speed. The name sounds tied to oaks, but oaks did not exist in the Jurassic Morrison. The animal lived among ferns, conifers, cycads, and other older plants. It is another place where inherited language can mislead us. Names remain even when interpretations change. Fossils are revised. The stone does not change, but our reading of it does. Frutidens, from the Morrison, brings the ornithischian story down again to an animal small enough to be missed in a landscape dominated by larger bones. It belonged to the heterodontosaurid line, with a body far removed from the museum hall giants. Such dinosaurs show how much of dinosaur history happened below knee height. A small beaked animal moving through low vegetation may not reshape a forest, but it can tell us how diverse dinosaur life had become by the late Jurassic. Juvenile dinosaurs also complicate the picture. A young sauropod was not simply a smaller adult in ecological terms. It ate at different heights. It faced different predators. It moved with different risks. A hatchling or yearling could be prey for animals that would never dare approach its parents. Growth transformed a dinosaur's place in the food web. Each body passed through several ecological identities before becoming the animal we reconstruct from adult bones. Eggs and nests from the Morrison are not as famous as some later Cretaceous nesting sites, and evidence must be treated carefully. But reproduction is always present, whether preserved or not. Every adult in the quarry wall began as something small enough to be crushed by a foot, taken by a crocodiliform, swallowed by a theropod, or lost to flood and heat. The giant body is only the last successful chapter in a dangerous growth story. A sauropod calf near a river margin would have lived in a world of legs. Adult legs, predator legs, tree trunks, cycad stems. The horizon would be broken by bodies, shadows, and vegetation. Its survival might have depended on staying near others, growing quickly, avoiding mud traps, and finding enough food at reachable heights. The Morrison was a place of giants partly because enough young survived to become them, not because survival was easy. Seasonality may be the quiet engine of the Morrison. The wet months could make the basin generous. Channels ran high, floodplains greened, ferns recovered. Insects multiplied. Fresh sediment covered old surfaces. Animals spread out because water allowed them to. Tracks became common where mud was soft. Dead animals could be carried, buried, or taken apart. A landscape that looks dry in one layer may have been briefly lush in the living season that produced it. Then, the dry season tightened the same world. Pools shrank. River channels narrowed. Plants browned away from water. Herbivores gathered near the remaining wet places, and predators followed them, not because the scene needed drama, but because life concentrates where water remains. A drought can create a bone bed without any single catastrophe large enough to be remembered as an event. It can do it through days of thirst, weakened animals, repeated deaths, and later floods that gather the evidence. This is one reason Morrison quarries can look chaotic. Bones may have accumulated over time, been moved by water, trampled by animals, exposed, buried again, and mixed with remains from different moments. A quarry wall is not always a death scene preserved instantly. Sometimes it is an edited landscape revised by rivers. Paleontologists read abrasion, orientation, breakage, tooth marks, sediment grain, and bone weathering to determine how long remains lay exposed and how far they may have moved. Dinosaur National Monument makes this process visible in a way few places can. The quarry wall holds many bones in place, not as a reconstructed skeleton, but as a deposit. It is crowded and uneven. That crowding matters. It shows accumulation, transport, burial, and the scale of Morrison preservation. The wall does not only say dinosaurs lived here. It says water and sediment worked on their bodies after death, turning a living ecosystem into a fossil-bearing layer. The Cleveland Lloyd Dinosaur Quarry adds another kind of puzzle. The abundance of Allosaurus remains there has raised questions for decades. Predator trap. drought assemblage. Reworked carcasses. A place where animals gathered, died, or transported, or returned repeatedly. The exact interpretation has shifted with study, but the quarry remains valuable because it shows that fossil sites are not simple containers. They are geological problems, ecological clues, and historical accidents all at once. Como Bluff, Garden Park, the Carnegie Quarry, Dry Mesa, Fruta, and other Morrison localities each tell their own version of the formation. Some are tied to the Bone Wars and the early rush to name spectacular dinosaurs. Others are connected to careful modern work on small vertebrates, plants, and sediment. Together they show how paleontology changed from collecting impressive bones to reconstructing whole systems. The Morrison helped make dinosaurs famous, then helped make their world scientifically deeper. The history of collecting also matters, because the fossils we have are shaped by what people looked for. Early crews wanted large skeletons for museums. A delicate mammal jaw or a bed of plant fragments could be overlooked, damaged, or left behind. Modern methods sift sediment, screen wash matrix, scan bones, analyze isotopes, study microscopic wear, and revisit old collections with new questions. The Morrison keeps changing not because the rocks change, but because our attention does. A museum mount can make a dinosaur look final. The bones are cleaned, the posture is chosen, missing pieces are cast, a label gives a name. But every mount is an argument made with evidence. Postures change, taxonomy changes, old assumptions soften. Brontosaurus, once folded into Apatosaurus for many audiences, has returned in some modern analyses as distinct enough to stand apart. These changes are not failures. They are how science keeps the fossil alive as evidence, rather than as decoration. The Morrison Formation has been studied for more than a century and a half, but familiarity can hide difficulty. The formation is spread across huge distances and records millions of years. A dinosaur from one part of the basin may not have lived at exactly the same time as a dinosaur from another. A faunalist can flatten time, making species look like neighbors, when some may have been separated by hundreds of thousands or millions of years. The rock asks for time as well as space. Stratigraphy is the discipline that keeps the world from collapsing into a single poster. Lower layers, higher layers, members, correlations, ash beds when available, fossils that help compare ages. The Morrison is not one living afternoon, it is many landscapes stacked together. When we say Morrison life, we are speaking of a broad interval, a family of related worlds, not one perfect scene where every famous animal meets under the same sky. Still, patterns emerge. Sauropods remain central. Large theropods remain present. Medium herbivores, armored forms, small vertebrates, turtles, crocodiliforms, pterosaurs, plants, and invertebrates return across localities in different proportions. The ecosystem is not random, it has structure. A seasonal basin under warm Jurassic conditions, fed by rivers, disturbed by floods, stressed by drought, and inhabited by a fauna that had learned to live with extremes. The climate was not wet in the simple jungle sense. Many reconstructions point to a dry to semi-arid seasonal setting in much of the Morrison Basin, though conditions varied by time and place. This distinction matters. The old image of dinosaurs in permanent tropical swamp does not fit all the evidence. Morrison life endured contrast. It was not an endless green world. It was a world where green returned and withdrew, where water shaped abundance and scarcity in cycles. Plants record this climate in their preservation and distribution. River margins can preserve more plant material because they had water, finer sediment, and better burial conditions. Upland or open areas may have supported vegetation that left little trace. The fossil plant record is therefore also biased, but it still points to conifers, cycads, ginkgo relatives, ferns, horsetails, and other non-flowering plants. The absence of grasses and flowers changes every visual reconstruction of the ground. A Morrison riverbank would not smell like a modern meadow after rain. No grass oils, no flower scent. Resin from conifers, damp mud, decaying fronds, stagnant pools, animal dung, and the mineral smell of wet sediment would define the place. The colors would also be different. Green, yes, but not the same green arrangement. Needles above. Fern fronds below. Cycad leaves stiff in the light. Horsetails in wet clusters. A world familiar enough to enter and strange enough to unsettle. The absence of flowering plants also changes insect life. No bees visiting blossoms, no butterflies over flowering shrubs in the familiar sense. Jurassic insects were diverse, but their relationships were built around older plants, decaying matter, predation, and water. Beetles, flies, dragonfly relatives, and other groups filled the air and low vegetation. Some fed on plants, some fed on other insects, some became food for small dinosaurs, pterosaurs, mammals, amphibians, and fish. Dragonflies or dragonfly-like insects near a pond would have been hunters in their own right. They did not need dinosaurs to be impressive. Their larvae lived in water, predatory even before flight. Adults patrolled above wet margins, catching smaller insects in air. To a small mammalia form, a large insect might be a meal. To an insect, the world was divided into perches, flight paths, temperature, and the sudden shadow of something bigger. Pterosaurs over the Morrison are harder to hold in the record, but they were part of the scene. Thin-walled bones break. A flying animal may die in places where burial is unlikely. Yet remains and tracks show that pterosaurs were there, using shorelines, river margins, and perhaps open floodplains. Some may have caught fish. Some may have hunted insects. Some may have scavenged. Their presence adds height to the ecosystem, a layer above the dinosaurs but still dependent on the same water and prey. A pterosaur track in ancient mud is a different kind of fossil from a skeleton. It records behavior directly, even if briefly. A foot pressed down. A hand touched the surface. The animal moved quadrupedally, as pterosaurs did on the ground, leaving marks that show posture in a way bones alone cannot. Tracks are not bodies, but they are moments. They say an animal passed here alive. Dinosaur tracks in and around Morrison-aged rocks also bring the animals back into motion. A bone can travel after death. A footprint cannot move from the surface where it was made, though it can be eroded, filled, and preserved. Tracks show walking speed, direction, group movement, and sometimes the softness of ground. A sauropod trackway across mud is a record of weight, spacing, gait, and the living pressure of flesh on sediment. Trackways are especially valuable because they preserve ordinary actions, not catastrophe, not death. Walking, turning, crossing a bank, following a shoreline. A theropod track does not have to end in attack to matter. It shows toes spreading in mud, claws marking the front of the print, weight shifting through the foot. The animal left no skeleton there, but for a few seconds, the ground held its shape. In the Morrison, the difference between a bone bed and a track surface is the difference between aftermath and presence. The bone bed says what remained after death and burial. The track says something moved before the surface hardened, flooded, dried, or was covered. Together, they make the ecosystem less static. One record gives bodies, the other gives behavior. Neither is complete, but each corrects the other. Predation is sometimes imagined too cleanly. A predator sees prey, chases, kills. In a real ecosystem, much predation is failed pursuit, scavenging, opportunism, testing weakness, stealing from carcasses, and avoiding injury. Allosaurus may have hunted, scavenged, and competed depending on condition and opportunity. Ceratosaurus, with a different skull and body, may have used overlapping but not identical habits. Torvosaurus, rarer and robust, adds another large carnivore to the guild. They did not exist as movie rivals. They existed as animals balancing risk and energy. A sauropod carcass would have changed a place for weeks or months. First large predators, then smaller scavengers, insects, bacteria, and the slow chemistry of decay. Bones exposed. Tendons dried. Teeth left marks. Water moved pieces. A single death could feed many lives and then become an anchor for sediment. The fossil may later be displayed as one dinosaur, but the death belonged to an entire community. Tooth marks on bone are evidence of feeding, but they can be difficult to interpret. A bite mark may come from a killing attack, a scavenging event, or chewing on a carcass after death. Healing around a wound shows the animal lived after injury. No healing suggests damage near or after death. Paleontologists work through such distinctions because the difference matters. It separates behavior from aftermath, predator from scavenger, violence from the long work of decay. Stegosaurus and Allosaurus meet in the record not as a staged battle, but through traces. A punctured vertebra. Possible tail spike wounds. Bite marks. Co-occurrence in deposits. The living interactions were probably varied. Some attacks failed. Some succeeded. Some predators avoided adult stegosaurs and targeted juveniles or injured individuals. The fossil record rarely gives a complete event. It gives enough to remind us that herbivores were not passive and predators were not safe. The phrase beyond the giants also includes the young predators. A juvenile Allosaurus was not simply a small version of the adult in ecological role. It may have hunted different prey, moved through different cover, taken more insects or small vertebrates early in life, then shifted as its skull, muscles, and body size changed. Growth changes diet. Growth changes risk. A predator too small to challenge a Camptosaurus might still be dangerous to hatchlings, lizards, and mammals. Ontogeny, the growth of an animal through life, is one of the hidden structures of any ecosystem. A single species can occupy several niches as it grows. This reduces competition between young and adults in some cases, but it also complicates the food web. A sauropod hatchling might be prey for a small theropod. A half-grown sauropod might be prey for Allosaurus. A full adult might be beyond most attack. One lineage becomes many ecological actors through time. Camarasaurus growth series from Morrison material help make this visible. Juveniles had different proportions from adults. Their heads, limbs, and bodies changed as they matured. Fossils from different growth stages let paleontologists study not only what the animal looked like, but how it became itself. The adult skeleton in a museum is a final form. The formation preserves the process. There is a quiet intimacy in juvenile bones. They are smaller, smoother, sometimes less fused, carrying the unfinished state of a life cut short. They also reveal the mathematics of survival. Large dinosaurs may have laid many eggs because many young would die. The adult giants we admire are the rare survivors of a dangerous beginning. Their size is not just biology, it is evidence of all the hazards they outlived. A floodplain after rain can look peaceful from a distance. Water shines between plants. The air cools, tracks fill slowly. But the same flood that feeds the plants can tear a channel open, drown nests, carry carcasses, and bury bones. Morrison sediment came from such events as well as from calmer deposition. The rock keeps both generosity and danger in the same layers. Mudstone speaks of slower water and floodplain settling. Sandstone often speaks of channels, bars, and stronger flow. Limestone may reflect lakes or chemical conditions in quieter water. These are simple statements, but in combination, they let geologists rebuild landscape. A bone inside sandstone may have a different history from one inside mudstone. The sediment around the fossil is part of the fossil's meaning. Paleosols, ancient soils, are among the most understated records in the formation. Root traces, carbonate nodules, color changes, and soil structures show that surfaces were exposed long enough for plants to grow and chemistry to work. They mark pauses in deposition. They tell us that the Morrison was not constantly being buried. It lived at the surface for long intervals, receiving rain, drying out, cracking, supporting plants, and holding footprints until the next event erased them. The sky over the Morrison would have been part of a warmer Jurassic planet, with no polar ice caps like those of the modern world. Sea levels, climates, and continental positions were different. North America was still part of a world rearranging after the breakup of Pangaea. The Atlantic was opening. The interior West was not yet the high mountain country familiar today. Deep time is not just old animals, it is a different geography under a different atmosphere of possibility. When the Rocky Mountains rose later, when rivers cut down, when erosion removed layer after layer, the Morrison came back to the surface. Fossils that had been buried since the Jurassic began to weather out. A bone that once lay under meters of sediment could appear on a slope as a dark fragment after rain. Discovery often begins that simply, not with a full skeleton, but with a piece that does not match the surrounding stone. The Bone Wars made the Morrison famous in a way that was both productive and messy. Marsh and Cope, their collectors, and later museum teams pulled extraordinary dinosaurs from western rocks, sometimes in haste, sometimes under rivalry, sometimes with naming practices that later needed repair. Science came tangled with ambition. Still, many of the animals that define Jurassic imagination entered public knowledge through those quarries, crates, and arguments. Later work has been slower in the best sense. Careful excavation, field notes, mapping, quarry grids, sediment samples, screen washing for small bones, CT scanning, comparative anatomy. The story moved from who could name the biggest animal to how the ecosystem worked. That shift is why a tiny mammal jaw can now matter as much as a sauropod vertebra, because both belong to the same reconstruction of life. A preparator working on Morrison matrix may spend hours removing grains around a bone no longer than a finger. The work is not cinematic from the outside. A needle, a microscope, dust, patience, but this is where the world opens. A small skull can identify a lineage, a tooth can reveal diet, a fragile limb can show posture. The grandeur of deep time often depends on very small movements of human hands. Scientific restraint is important here. It is tempting to make every fossil speak in full sentences. The evidence does not allow that. We can infer, we can compare, we can test, we can propose. But we cannot watch a Morrison animal directly. The best reconstructions carry uncertainty openly. They let the animal remain partly unknown rather than filling every gap with confidence it has not earned. That uncertainty does not weaken the story. It gives the story its texture. A landscape with unanswered questions is closer to the real past than a perfectly labeled scene. Did some sauropods migrate seasonally? Possibly. Did Allosaurus hunt cooperatively? Evidence remains debated. Did certain small mammals feed on insects underground? The anatomy suggests it in some cases. Each answer has a margin. The margin is where science stays honest. Return to the riverbank. The wet season has passed its peak. New sediment lies over old tracks. A Camptosaurus group moves along the edge of vegetation, heads rising and lowering as they feed. A small theropod watches from cover, but does not approach. It is not large enough, or the chance is wrong. Predators spend much of their lives deciding not to attack. That restraint is part of survival. Farther off, a Stegosaurus browses low plants, body angled slightly as it works along the margin. Its plates catch light, not as decorations for us, but as living structures covered in tissue. Its tail hangs with the quiet readiness of a weapon that does not need to be used often to matter. A young animal stays nearer the adults. The scene is calm, because danger has not yet chosen a moment. At the same time, under the bank, a turtle pushes through shallow water. Mud lifts and settles behind it. A fish darts away. An amphibian remains still. The turtle's world is measured in depth, temperature, cover, and the shape of the bottom. The sauropod herd beyond the trees may shake the ground, but the turtle's immediate concern is the pool, the bank, and the chance of reaching cover before a small crocodiliform moves. A pterosaur crosses above the channel, low enough for its shadow to pass over water. It may be searching for fish or insects, or simply moving between perches. Its body is light, but not fragile in life. The wing membrane adjusts with air. The head turns. The animal makes the sky part of the Morrison ecosystem, connecting water, bank, and open space in a way ground animals cannot. In the leaf litter, a mammaliform waits for full darkness. Its hearing is better suited to the night than the eyes of many larger animals. It can smell insects under damp debris. It can feel the safety of a narrow entrance where larger jaws cannot follow. Smallness is not failure. In the Morrison, smallness is a strategy with a long future. When night settles, the large animals do not vanish. Some may rest. Some may move. The assumptions we make about dinosaur daily rhythms are still refined by evidence from eyes, bone histology, and comparisons with living animals. But the night certainly opens space for smaller creatures. A floodplain is not one ecosystem by day and another by night, but its emphasis changes. Different senses become useful. Different risks rise. The Morrison after dark might have sounded less like silence than like detail. Insects, water, the movement of small bodies, a distant splash, leaves shifting as a large animal changes position. The breath of a sauropod would not need to be imagined as thunder. It could be ordinary and immense at the same time, one more animal sound among many, scaled beyond comfort but still biological. Morning brings heat back quickly. Exposed mud firms. Small tracks dry and crack. A footprint left at dawn may be distorted by noon, then filled by a later wash of sediment. Fossilization depends on timing so narrow it can feel impossible. Yet across millions of years, rare conditions accumulate enough evidence for us to reconstruct the pattern. The Morrison is built from many such improbabilities. Not every animal that lived there is known. Some left no fossils. Some fossils remain buried. Some were destroyed before discovery. Some sit in collections unidentified or waiting for a new specialist. The Morrison we describe is therefore both rich and incomplete. That incompleteness should stay visible. The formation is a window, not a wall removed from the past. Even the famous dinosaurs are incomplete in subtle ways. Skin texture is rarely preserved. Color is mostly unknown. Soft tissues are inferred from muscle scars, relatives, and biomechanics. Sounds are almost entirely beyond reach. Behavior must be reconstructed from tracks, bone beds, injuries, growth, and living analogs. The skeleton is a powerful beginning, but it is not the whole animal. A living Diplodocus had lungs, blood vessels, nerves, gut microbes, parasites, scars, and a daily need to feed. It may have known familiar routes, responded to others of its kind, avoided bad footing, and remembered water sources if its brain allowed such mapping. None of that needs to be exaggerated. Ordinary animal competence is enough. The animal did not need to be symbolic. It needed to live. A living Allosaurus also had limits. Its teeth broke and replaced. Its muscles tired. Its bones recorded stress. It could misjudge. It could be injured by prey, rivals, terrain, infection. Apex predator is not a guarantee. It is a position in a food web that must be paid for with constant success. A few bad weeks could be fatal. For smaller animals, a few bad hours might be enough. A sudden flood, a cold night, a predator at the wrong burrow entrance, a drying pool, a failed hatch. High reproduction may compensate at the population level, but individuals do not experience populations. They experience hunger, shelter, risk, and chance. The Morrison's richness was made of countless fragile lives, most of which left no name. Names can create a false hierarchy. Allosaurus feels more real than Amphicotylus because it is famous. Stegosaurus feels more important than a frog because its plates are iconic. But ecosystems do not recognize fame. A small amphibian population can say more about wet refuges than a giant femur can. A turtle shell can place water on the map. A plant bed can explain how herbivores survived. The small record keeps the giants from floating in imagination. That is why plant fossils matter so much in a dinosaur formation. Leaves, wood, pollen where preserved, and root traces are not background decoration. They are evidence of the food base. Without them, sauropods become engineering problems detached from ecology. With them, the question becomes richer. What was available? Where did it grow? How did it change with season? Which animals fed high, low, near water, away from water? The plants turned dinosaurs back into animals. Conifer wood in the Morrison can tell of trunks that stood long before burial. Some pieces drifted. Some were buried near where they fell. Growth rings, cellular structure, and association with sediment provide clues to climate and environment. A log may be less visually impressive than a skull, but it carries the forest into the rock. It is the architecture that the animals moved through. Ferns are especially useful for imagining the lower world. They grew where moisture allowed, filling understories and wet margins. Their fronds could recover quickly after disturbance, making them important in a landscape of floods and trampling. A sauropod browsing through a patch could crush many plants without ending the patch forever. Disturbance and regrowth may have been constant rhythms on floodplain surfaces. Cycads and Bennettitalians added tougher, more structured low vegetation. Some may have been defended chemically. Some produced cones or reproductive structures that attracted animals. The relationships between Jurassic plants and herbivores were different from later relationships between flowering plants and insects, birds, or mammals, but they were still relationships. Feeding pressure shapes plants. Plant defenses shape feeders. The Morrison was full of such slow negotiations. Ginkgo relatives remind us that survival across time can be misleading. The modern ginkgo makes the lineage feel familiar, but Jurassic ginkgo diversity was broader. What remains today is a narrow survivor of a once richer group. The Morrison plants therefore show not just ancient difference, but ancient abundance in lineages that later shrank. Deep time is full of groups that were once ordinary and are now rare. Horsetails along water edges connect the Jurassic to an even deeper plant history. Their ancestors had been much larger and more dominant in Paleozoic coal forests. By the Morrison's time, they were smaller players, but still persistent. A patch of horsetails near a channel is a living fossil scene inside a fossil world, an older design surviving under the feet of dinosaurs that would themselves one day become ancient. The Morrison is often described as a dinosaur formation, and that is fair in one sense. Its dinosaurs are extraordinary. But the formation is also a plant formation, a river formation, a drought formation, a small vertebrate formation, a record of soils and climate. To call it only a dinosaur graveyard is to stop reading after the largest words. A quarry face can be approached like a landscape turned vertical. The lower beds are older ground. Higher beds are younger ground. A channel cuts through earlier deposits. A bone lies at the base of a sandstone. Another rests in overbank mudstone. Root traces cross a surface where plants lived after an earlier flood. The wall is not only what was buried, it is how place changed. In some Morrison localities, volcanic ash beds helped provide dates or correlations, tying local sediment to broader geologic time. Ash falls are useful because they can spread across large areas quickly and contain minerals suitable for radiometric dating. A thin ash layer may not look dramatic beside a dinosaur bone, but it can anchor time more precisely than the bone itself. Time in paleontology is often held by grains too small to notice. Dating the Morrison has been refined over many decades, and different parts of the formation fall within the late Jurassic. The exact numbers vary by locality and method, but the living worlds preserved there belong broadly to the interval before the Cretaceous began. They are late Jurassic landscapes, close enough to the next period that some lineages already point forward, yet still fully part of a world before flowering plants transformed the land. The transition to the Cretaceous would not arrive as a sudden curtain for the animals living there. No Stegosaurus looked up and felt a period ending. Environments changed regionally. Lineages declined or persisted. New plant groups would eventually appear. Sauropod communities shifted. Ornithischians diversified in new directions. But for any one animal, the experience remained immediate. Food, water, mates, shelter, injury, heat, and the next step. The Morrison captures a moment before that botanical shift. It shows a large terrestrial ecosystem operating without angiosperm dominance, without grasslands, without the plant-animal relationships that later define much of the modern world. This makes its success more striking. The formation's animals were not waiting for modern nature to be invented. They thrived in a different botanical order, one that supported some of the largest land animals ever known. The giants were therefore not mistakes or exaggerations. They were ecological products of a specific world. Warm climate, large floodplains, productive plant communities, air sac respiratory systems in sauropods, hollowed bones that reduced mass, long necks that widened feeding reach, reproductive strategies that produced many young. None of these alone explains everything. Together they made a scale of land life possible that has never returned in the same way. Yet the giants did not control everything. A drought could humble them. A stuck foot could kill them. Disease could move through a group. A calf could be lost in minutes. A carcass could become food for animals that never feared the living adult. Size changes risk, but it does not erase it. The Morrison's largest animals were still bound to the same basic exchanges as the smallest: energy in, energy out, survival never guaranteed. There is a useful humility in that. The past is not more meaningful because its animals were large. It is meaningful because it was real. A frog in a drying Morrison pool is as much a Jurassic life as a sauropod crossing the floodplain. A beetle under bark is as much part of the system as Allosaurus. The formation teaches scale, but also proportion. The world works through everything at once. Consider a single conifer at the edge of a channel. Its roots hold sediment. Its fallen needles feed decomposers. Its shade preserves moisture for ferns and small animals. Its branches feed browsing dinosaurs. Its trunk offers perches for pterosaurs or early birds if they came near. When it falls, it changes the path of water, shelters insects, and eventually enters the sediment. One tree becomes geology, habitat, food, and future fossil. Now place that tree inside a basin with thousands of channels, millions of plants, herds of sauropods, groups of ornithopods, armored dinosaurs, predators, turtles, crocodiliforms, mammals, insects, fish, and seasonal weather. The Morrison becomes less like a stage and more like a system of overlapping needs. No single animal holds the center for long. The center moves with water, food, death, and time. The word formation can sound fixed, as if the Morrison is one object. In the field, it is often erosion, slope, color, heat, and fragments underfoot. A paleontologist may walk for hours across exposures, scanning for texture and shape. Bone catches light differently from stone. A tooth may gleam. A weathered fragment may show internal structure. Discovery begins with attention trained to notice what does not belong to ordinary rock. Once a fossil is found, its removal is a careful negotiation. Exposed bone is fragile after long burial. Consolidants may be applied. Trenches are cut around the specimen. Plaster jackets protect blocks for transport. In the lab, preparation can take months or years. The public often sees the end of the process, a cleaned skeleton under lights. The Morrison's evidence reaches that point through dust, patience, and many decisions about what to leave attached until later. Some fossils are never removed whole. because their context matters too much, or because the deposit itself is the exhibit. A quarry wall preserves relationships that a skeleton in isolation cannot. Which bones overlap? Which are broken? Which direction they point? Whether small bones occur between larger ones? Whether sediment grades from coarse to fine? Context is not background, it is data. In old collections, context was sometimes lost. Labels may be vague, locality names may be broad, stratigraphic positions may be uncertain. Modern researchers work around these limits, but they also show why field methods matter. A bone without context can still teach anatomy. A bone with context can teach ecology, behavior, environment, and time. The Morrison has both kinds of record, and scientists use them carefully. The public imagination usually enters the Morrison through complete skeletons, but paleontologists often work with less. A partial jaw, a vertebral centrum, a limb shaft, a tooth, a piece of armor. These fragments can be enough to identify a taxon, or at least narrow its place. They can extend a range, reveal a body size, or show that a certain animal lived in a certain part of the basin. Fragmentary evidence is not weak if it is read appropriately. A shed theropod tooth can carry a predator across a site where no skeleton of that predator appears. Teeth are lost and replaced during life, and carnivores leave them while feeding or biting bone. A quarry with herbivore bones and theropod teeth may record scavenging or predation. The tooth is small, but it changes the interpretation. It says the predator was present, at least for a moment. Sauropod teeth, worn and replaced, can speak differently. Their shapes, microwear, and replacement patterns help reveal feeding strategies. Some teeth suggest stripping soft vegetation. Others suggest tougher cropping. None of this lets us watch a meal, but it narrows the possibilities. Diet leaves marks on enamel. The smallest surfaces can preserve the daily habits of the largest animals. Bone histology adds another layer. Thin sections under a microscope show growth patterns, vascularization, pauses, remodeling. A giant bone is not just a support beam, it is living tissue recorded in mineral form. Growth rates tell us how quickly animals reached large size. Lines of arrested growth may point to seasonal stress or changing physiology. The microscope brings the Morrison from landscape down to cells. Isotopes can add still another kind of evidence, tracing aspects of diet, water, and climate through chemistry. Such methods require caution because fossilization can alter original signals. But when used carefully, geochemistry can complement bones and sediment. The Morrison becomes not only visible but measurable, a world reconstructed through ratios, minerals, and the chemistry of ancient water and tissues. This scientific layering is important because it keeps the narration from becoming mere atmosphere. A fossil landscape is not built by imagination alone, it is constrained by rock. The riverbank, the fern patch, the drying pool, the small mammal at night, the sauropod herd in heat, all of these scenes must return to evidence. Where the evidence stops, the language should slow down and admit uncertainty. One of the most powerful facts about the Morrison is that it preserves abundance. Not just a single animal, but many. Abundance lets researchers ask population questions. Which animals were common? Which were rare? Were certain species associated with particular sediments? Do age classes cluster? Are bite marks frequent? Do injuries recur? Paleontology becomes ecology when the sample is large enough to show pattern. At the same time, abundance can mislead if preservation favors certain animals. Large bones fossilize better. Animals living near rivers are more likely to be buried than animals in uplands. Carcasses may be transported from where animals lived. A common fossil is not always a common living animal in the same proportion. The Morrison is rich, but not transparent. Every number has a taphonomic shadow. That shadow is why paleontologists compare sites. A pattern in one quarry may reflect local conditions. A pattern repeated across the basin carries more weight. If Camarasaurus appears again and again, its abundance becomes harder to dismiss as accident. If small mammals appear mostly where sediment was screenwashed, that says as much about collection method as animal rarity. The fossil record is both natural and human-made in what it reveals. The Morrison has also been compared with roughly similar late Jurassic deposits elsewhere, such as Portugal's Morrison Formation and Tanzania's Tendaguru beds. These comparisons show broad Jurassic patterns but also regional differences. Some genera or relatives appear across more than one region, others are local. The breakup of Pangaea was changing the rules of distribution. Animals could still resemble one another across continents, but isolation was beginning to write separate histories. Within North America, the Morrison Basin itself was not uniform. Western influences, interior drainage, changing sediment sources, and local basins all shaped the deposits. The formation's geography was broad enough that no single scene can represent it all. A wetter gallery forest near one channel and a dry open floodplain elsewhere can both be Morrison. The real world held contradictions because real landscapes always do. A documentary image often prefers clarity. One environment, one sky, one list of animals. The Morrison resists that. It asks for a mosaic: sandbars, flood basins, shallow lakes, soils, wetlands, dry ground, open woodland, river corridors. Over millions of years, the pieces shifted. Any honest reconstruction should feel like a moving map rather than a painted backdrop. If the camera followed water, it would find much of the life. A channel bends across the floodplain. Sand collects on the inner curve. Mud settles beyond the bank during flood. Fish gather in deeper pockets. Turtles bask and slip away. Crocodiliforms wait. Ferns thicken where roots can reach moisture. Herbivores return to drink, leaving tracks that overlap until the mud becomes unreadable. If the camera followed a carcass, it would find another map. First scent. Then flies and beetles. Small scavengers. Large predators if they find it. Broken ribs. Pulled limbs. Teeth lost in feeding. Bones moved by trampling. Sun drying exposed surfaces. Rain softening tissue. A later flood carrying pieces into a channel. Months or years later, sediment sealing what remains. Millions of years later, a field crew reading the aftermath. If the camera followed a seed or spore, the Morrison becomes slower. A plant releases reproductive material into air or water. Some fails, some settles in poor ground, some reaches a damp margin and grows. The young plant may be eaten, trampled, shaded, flooded, or dried. A few persist long enough to become part of the next season's cover. Plant success underlies every animal story, but it operates at a rhythm most viewers rarely notice. If the camera followed a small mammal, the world becomes close and dangerous. A burrow entrance under roots. The smell of insects. The vibration of large feet. The sudden open space between two pieces of cover. The safety of darkness. The risk of a small theropod. The chance to feed at a carcass after larger mouths have left scraps. This is Jurassic life measured in heartbeats rather than in tons. If the camera followed a sauropod, the world becomes distance. Roots between feeding grounds. Water sources remembered or found through group movement. Trees stripped at one height. Mud tested with each step. Calves moving within reach of adults. The body requiring constant intake, constant processing, constant negotiation with gravity. The sauropod is large, but its life is made of repeated small decisions. If the camera followed Allosaurus, the world becomes edges. Shade edges, herd edges, carcass edges. The weak animal at the edge of a group. The dangerous distance where attack becomes possible, but escape still remains likely. Predators live by judging edges correctly. Too cautious, and they starve. Too bold, and they are injured. The fossil record preserves teeth and bones, but behind them is a life of calculations. If the camera followed Stegosaurus, the world becomes low plants and rearward danger. A head held down. A body browsing through ferns and cycads. Plates visible above the back, perhaps signaling to others or helping with heat. Tail spikes held where an attacker must respect them. This animal's survival does not come from speed. It comes from making the cost of approach high enough that predators look for easier food. If the camera followed a Camptosaurus group, the world becomes alert movement. Feeding, lifting heads, shifting position, staying aware. Medium herbivores often live between strategies. Not too large to ignore predators. Not too armored to stand safely. Not too small to disappear easily. Their survival depends on group spacing, quick response, and food efficient enough to keep bodies ready to move. Such shifting viewpoints help restore the Morrison as an ecosystem rather than a list. Every animal uses a different version of the same place. The turtle's floodplain is not the pterosaurs. The sauropod's forest is not the mammals. The predator's drought is not the plants. Yet all of them overlap, and the rock records those overlaps in fragments. The deeper lesson is not that the Morrison was strange. It was strange to us, but ordinary to itself. The animals were not living in a prehistoric theme. They were living in the present tense of their own world. A sauropod did not know it was a giant of deep time. A mammal did not know it was an ancestor of future survivors. A fern did not know it was part of a formation that would be named for a town in Colorado. This can be hard to hold because fossils arrive after meaning has been added. Names, museum halls, paintings, documentaries, childhood fascination. The Morrison has become a symbol of the Jurassic, but before it was symbol, it was sediment underfoot and water in channels. Its animals lived without our categories. The formation asks us to remove the glass case for a moment and let the world become ordinary again. Ordinary does not mean small. It means functional. The largest land animals moved through days of feeding and resting. Predators missed more often than they killed. Small animals bred, hid, foraged, and died. Plants grew where water allowed. Rivers shifted. Mud cracked. Floods came. Nothing needed to be staged, because reality was already enough. By the time a Morrison bone enters a museum, it has crossed an impossible sequence of transformations. Living tissue became dead matter. Dead matter became buried remains. Buried remains mineralized. Rock rose and eroded. A human found it, excavated it, stabilized it, studied it, displayed it. The final skeleton is not just a dinosaur, it is a survival story of evidence. The same is true for the smallest fossils, perhaps even more so. A mammal tooth found through screen washing survived not only Jurassic predation and burial, but also the bias of human attention. It had to pass through sediment, tools, sieves, labels, microscopes, and interpretation. Its smallness makes its preservation feel almost improbable, which is why it matters so much. When we say life beyond the giants, we are not diminishing the giants. We are giving them back their world. Diplodocus becomes more meaningful beside ferns, turtles, and dry season channels. Allosaurus becomes more real when it is wounded, hungry, and surrounded by competitors and scavengers. Stegosaurus becomes more than a profile when its plates and spikes are placed in the daily problem of not being eaten. A landscape without its small animals is like a skeleton without joints. The large parts are visible, but movement is missing. The Morrison's small creatures give the system movement. They connect plants to predators, water to land, day to night, death to renewal. They are the connective tissue of the ancient floodplain. The formation also reminds us that preservation favors endings, but life is mostly middle. A fossil bone often marks death, a footprint marks passage, a tooth marks feeding or replacement, a plant impression marks burial. None of these easily preserve play, learning, recognition, routine, or the long, uneventful hours that make up most animal existence. Our reconstructions should leave room for those quiet intervals. There were mornings when nothing spectacular happened. A turtle warmed itself. A small dinosaur fed. A sauropod herd moved slowly. Insects rose above the water. A predator slept in shade. Clouds built and did not rain. Such days rarely leave a dramatic trace, but they were the majority of the Jurassic. The past was not only catastrophe and combat, it was duration. Duration is what the Morrison gives so strongly. Millions of years of related landscapes, generations beyond counting, river channels migrating across basins, species appearing, persisting, and disappearing, bone beds forming, soils developing, plants recovering after flood. The human mind wants a scene, but the formation is a long process. Its life existed through time deeper than any single image can hold. The title speaks of Jurassic life beyond the giants, but even that phrase contains scale. Beyond can mean around them, beneath them, before them, after them, and inside the systems that sustain them. It can mean the small animals underfoot. It can mean plants and soils. It can mean the juvenile stages of giant species. It can mean the human work needed to see past the obvious bone. A good Morrison reconstruction should therefore have weight at several levels. The distant body of a sauropod against conifers, the mid-ground shape of Stegosaurus feeding low, the waterline with turtles and crocodiliforms, the small theropod near shade, the mammal under roots, the insects over mud, the sediment that will later decide which of them can be known. Now imagine the dry season deepening. The river is narrower. Dust collects on cycad leaves. A group of Camptosaurus approaches water in intervals, not all at once. A pterosaur stands on the bank, stepping carefully. The mud holds older tracks, softened at the edges. Farther away, sauropods are moving toward a line of trees whose roots still reach moisture. Everything is being pulled inward by water. A young Dryosaurus breaks from cover and runs across open ground. The movement is quick, low, and efficient. No predator follows in this moment. The animal slows near a patch of ferns and begins to feed. A scene like this may never fossilize. No death, no track preserved, no bone buried. Yet such ordinary survival was the substance of the ecosystem. Fossils are the rare exceptions left by lives mostly unrecorded. Near the shrinking pool, fish disturb the surface. Oxygen is lower in warm water. A turtle lifts its head. A crocodiliform remains still enough to become part of the bank. Insects gather where wet mud meets air. A small mammaliaform waits for dark. If drought continues, some of these animals will die. If rain comes, the pool may reconnect to the channel and the scene will loosen again. Clouds eventually build over the basin. Rain arrives hard, not as gentle background, but as force. Dry channels fill quickly. Mud softens. Banks collapse. Carcasses move. Tracks vanish under new sediment. Plants bend under water and then stand again when the flood recedes. The same event that destroys evidence in one place creates preservation in another. A flood is both eraser and archivist. After the flood, new surfaces wait. Soft mud receives the feet of animals returning to water. A sauropod track presses deep and fills with cloudy water. Smaller prints cross its edge. A pterosaur leaves hand and footmarks near the shallows. Worms or arthropods disturb the surface. The next layer begins before anyone knows it is a layer. Geology starts as weather. Weeks later, green returns more strongly. Ferns open. Horsetails thicken. Insects increase. Herbivores spread away from the channel. Predators follow less concentrated routes. The basin relaxes. A scientist looking only at a bone bed might see death, but the living system was also recovery. Seasonal landscapes are built on return as much as loss. This cycle of concentration and release may explain much about Morrison abundance. During favorable times, large herbivores could range widely. During stress, they gathered. Gathering creates tracks, trampling, competition, predation, and death. Later floods gather the remains again. Over geological time, these repeated seasonal processes create deposits that feel sudden, but may represent many separate hardships layered together. The Morrison's animals were adapted to this rhythm. Not perfectly, no adaptation removes risk, but lineages that persisted there had traits that worked often enough. Sauropod size and digestive capacity. Ornithopod mobility. Stegosaur defense. Theropod opportunism. Turtle resilience. Crocodiliform patience. Mammalian smallness. Plant regrowth. The ecosystem was not gentle, but it was livable. Livable is a modest word, and it may be the right one. The Morrison was not a paradise made for dinosaurs. It was a changing basin where life found workable solutions. That is more interesting than paradise. A paradise does not explain evolution. Constraint does. Scarcity, season, competition, danger, and opportunity shaped the bodies we later call iconic. When the Jurassic ended, Morrison-style ecosystems did not simply vanish in a single day. The transition into the Cretaceous was uneven. Some lineages declined, others continued elsewhere. New floras eventually changed the structure of land habitats. Sauropods remained important in many regions, but the familiar Morrison community was part of a particular interval. Its combination of animals and plants belonged to that time, not to all dinosaur history. This specificity matters because dinosaurs lived for an enormous span of time. The Morrison is not the whole Jurassic, and the Jurassic is not the whole Mesozoic. Tyrannosaurus never walked beside Stegosaurus in the Morrison. Triceratops belongs to a much later world. Grasslands were not under the feet of Diplodocus. Keeping those separations clear honors the past better than blending every famous dinosaur into one impossible scene. The Morrison's real scene is strong enough without impossible additions. Allosaurus and Stegosaurus, Diplodocus and Camarasaurus, Camptosaurus and Dryosaurus, small mammals and crocodiliforms, ferns, conifers, ginkgos, cycads, horsetails, rivers and floodplains under a warm seasonal sky. This is not less dramatic because it is accurate. It is more compelling because the pieces actually belong together. A mounted skeleton can make time collapse. You stand in front of it for minutes, maybe an hour. The animal's life took years. Its species persisted for far longer. The formation records millions. The gulf between observation and duration is enormous. Paleontology asks us to stand in a brief human moment and still think at the scale of basins, climates, and lineages. That scale can be unsettling. The Morrison Formation was being deposited around 150 million years before the present. Human civilization occupies only a tiny fraction of that distance. Yet the gap is not empty. It is crossed by evidence. Bone, track, tooth, leaf, sediment, ash, chemistry, comparison. Each piece is small against time, but together they make an ancient world legible. Legible does not mean complete. The Morrison still has hidden animals, hidden plants, misidentified fragments, uncollected localities, questions that will change with the next specimen. This is part of its value. A finished past would be less alive scientifically. The formation remains active because it can still surprise us. Recent and future work will keep shifting details. New analyses of sauropod relationships refine which species are valid and how they are related. New small vertebrate finds fill out the undergrowth. New stratigraphic work sharpens timing. New technologies reveal internal bone structure without destroying specimens. The Morrison is old, but Morrison's science is not. For the viewer, the most useful change may be a change of attention. The next time a sauropod skeleton fills the frame, look at the space under it. Imagine the mud, the plants, the insects, the animals waiting for shade, the river that made the rock, the dry season that stressed the herd. the flood that buried the bones. The giant becomes a doorway rather than the whole room. Look also at the edges of museum displays: a small turtle shell, a crocodiliform skull, a mammal jaw, a slab with plant impressions, a label naming a formation member. These pieces may seem secondary, but they are often where the ecosystem becomes clear. A dinosaur haul is most powerful when it stops being a haul of isolated bodies and becomes a reconstructed environment. In that environment, the Morrison is not only ancient America, it is a lesson in how life fills available space. Large bodies, small bodies, water animals, air animals, burrowers, browsers, hunters, scavengers, plants, decomposers. Given time, life divides the world into possibilities. Some are spectacular. Some are quiet. All are necessary. The giants dominate the first glance because human vision is drawn to scale, but deep time rewards the second glance. The tiny tooth, the root trace, the healed wound, the track crossing another track, the mud crack, the seed fern fragment, the evidence that a place was not just inhabited, but lived in by many kinds of bodies at once. By now, the quarry wall from the beginning should look different. The rib is still there. It still belonged to a large animal. But around it, you can sense more. Water moved here. Smaller bones may lie nearby, hidden or lost. Plants grew on the floodplain before burial. Predators fed somewhere in this system. Turtles, frogs, lizards, insects, mammals, and pterosaurs shared the larger world that made the rib possible. The rib no longer stands for one giant alone. It stands for a floodplain. It stands for a season. It stands for the bodies that fed the animal, the bodies that avoided it, the bodies that fed on it after death, and the sediment that finally covered it. A single bone can hold an ecosystem if it is read with enough patience. At evening in the Jurassic Basin, light lowers over conifers and open ground. A sauropod group moves toward trees, each step slow but not timeless. A stegosaurus turns away from the channel. Small shapes begin to appear near roots. A pterosaur settles on a bank. Insects thicken above water. The floodplain does not know it will become famous. It is simply entering another night. The air cools. Mud darkens. A mammaliform leaves its shelter and passes over a footprint made by an animal thousands of times heavier than itself. For a moment, the whole Morrison story is there in miniature. The giant impression, the small body crossing it, the damp sediment holding both. One trace may vanish by morning, another may last long enough to become stone. Most of what lived will never be found. Most tracks will wash away, most bones will decay, most leaves will rot into soil. But enough remains. Enough for a rib to rise from sandstone. Enough for a turtle shell to place water on the map. Enough for a small tooth to bring night back into the story. Enough for the Morrison Formation to become not just a graveyard of giants, but a record of a living Jurassic world. And in that world, beyond the giants, life continues at every scale. Under leaves, in pools, across banks, inside burrows, above channels, along the margins where water holds the basin together. The Morrison does not ask us to look away from the enormous animals. It asks us to keep looking after we have seen them. The last light touches a stone surface that will one day be split by human hands. Inside it, a line of bone waits without urgency. Around that bone, the vanished floodplain waits as well. Not complete, not silent, not simple, just patient, layered, and still readable if we are willing to follow the evidence past the giants and back into the life that surrounded them. The Morrison Basin held a kind of geography that changed with each channel. A river did not merely pass through the land, it rearranged the land. It cut into older sediment, abandoned bends, built levees, filled ponds, and left behind ribbons of sand inside broader sheets of mud. Animals used these river-made shapes without knowing their origin. A shaded levee could become a path. An abandoned channel could become a pool. A sandbar could become a crossing place, then a fossil surface, then a layer in a cliff. Where a channel cut deeply enough, it could expose older deposits and bones that had already begun their first stage of fossil history. Those fragments might be moved again, rounded by transport, and redeposited with younger remains. This is one reason some fossil assemblages require caution. Not every bone in one rock bed necessarily died in the same hour, or even the same year. Rivers mix time as well as sediment. The saltwash and brushy basin members, names used for parts of the Morrison in many areas, preserve different aspects of that long depositional story. Sandier intervals often reflect more channelized systems. Mud-rich intervals can reflect floodplains, lakes, volcanic ash influence, and overbank environments. These divisions are not just technical labels. They help explain why fossils appear where they do and why certain kinds of preservation cluster in particular layers. Volcanic ash, weathered into clay-rich layers in parts of the formation, may have influenced soils and water chemistry. Ash can enrich landscapes, but it can also stress them depending on amount and conditions. Over time, altered ash contributed to the colors and textures of Morrison mudstones. The dinosaurs did not walk through a static backdrop. They lived in a basin, receiving signals from distant geologic activity as well as from local weather. Some Morrison mudstones swell and crumble when exposed today, creating slopes that shed fragments after rain or frost. Modern weathering is part of discovery. A fossil may remain hidden for millions of years and then appear because a storm removed a few centimeters of clay. The ancient climate made the deposit. The modern climate helps reveal it. Two different weather systems, separated by deep time, collaborate in the fossil's return. The color of the rock can carry environmental information. Reds often indicate oxidizing conditions, where iron minerals formed in exposed or well-drained settings. Greens and grays may suggest more reducing conditions, wetter or more chemically limited environments. These colors are not perfect codes, but they help geologists read ancient surfaces. A quarry is therefore also a page of climate written in mineral stains. Around water, the Morrison would have held tracks of many sizes. Sauropod prints broad and deep. Theropod prints narrow and clawed. Ornithopod prints with different proportions. Small reptile and invertebrate traces too faint to survive often. Track surfaces show traffic, but they also show behavior shaped by water. Animals come where mud exists because mud exists where water has been. A single sauropod track could alter a small habitat. When rain or floodwater filled it, the depression might hold moisture longer than the surrounding surface. Tiny organisms could use it briefly. Insects might gather. Small animals might drink from it. Then it would dry, crack, or fill with sediment. Even a footprint could become a temporary feature in the landscape before becoming a fossil feature in the rock. In modern ecosystems, large herbivores can shape vegetation by browsing, trampling, breaking branches, dispersing seeds, and opening paths. Morrison sauropods likely had similar broad effects, though the details depended on plants that were very different from modern savanna grasses and flowering shrubs. They may have kept certain areas open, damaged young trees, and created disturbed patches where ferns and other fast-growing plants recovered quickly. Dung is rarely the glamorous fossil, but it is central to ecosystems. Coprolites and traces of digestion can reveal diet and food web connections when preserved. Even when they are not found, the living reality remains. Large herbivores produced enormous amounts of waste. That waste returned nutrients, fed insects, supported microbes, and marked roots. The Morrison floodplain would have smelled and functioned like a place where many large bodies were constantly converting plants into movement and manure. Parasites almost certainly lived in Morrison animals, though their direct evidence is scarce. Blood-feeding insects, internal worms, infections around wounds, and microbial diseases would have affected survival. The fossil record favors bones, but bodies are ecosystems too. A giant sauropod carried smaller lives on and inside it. A predator's infected bite could matter as much as the original injury. Ancient life was biological at every level. Skin impressions from Morrison dinosaurs are not common, but when dinosaur skin is preserved from comparable animals, it reminds us that the skeleton was covered by living surfaces: scales, possible keratin sheaths, pads under feet, soft tissues around jaws, muscles along tails. The animals were not bone frameworks. They were bodies meeting heat, insects, mud, scratches, wounds, and water every day. Feet deserve attention, because the Morrison is a landscape of weight. Sauropod feet spread, force through padded structures. Theropod feet balanced speed, grip, and support through 3 main toes. Ornithopod feet carried animals ready to run. Stegosaur feet supported a low browsing body with a defensive tail behind. Trackways show these designs touching the world directly, converting anatomy into pressure marks. The hand of a sauropod, columnar and strange, did not grasp like a mammal's hand. It formed part of a support system for an immense forequarter. The hand of a theropod could seize, brace, slash, or manipulate within limits. The hand of a pterosaur was transformed into a wing support while still leaving small clawed fingers. In the Morrison, limbs show how evolution divided work among bodies. Next, tell another story. Sauropod necks extended feeding reach. Stegosaur necks kept the head low. Theropod necks connected jaws to striking movement. Pterosaur necks balanced skulls in flight and on the ground. A neck is not only a length of vertebrae, it is a behavioral tool, shaping how an animal sees, feeds, fights, and moves through space. Tails were equally varied. Diplodocid tails extended for balance and perhaps communication or defense. Stegosaur tails carried spikes. Theropod tails counterbalanced the body during bipedal movement. Crocodiliform tails propelled bodies in water or stabilized them on land depending on form. The Morrison was full of tails doing different work, each tied to a different way of being alive. Jaws are the ecosystem's cutting edge. A sauropod cropping leaves, an ornithopod beak taking low vegetation, a theropod jaw slicing flesh, a turtle jaw processing plants or small animals depending on species, a crocodiliform jaw closing near water, a mammaliform jaw working insects with precise cusps. The food web is written in mouths. Teeth preserve especially well because enamel is durable. This gives paleontologists a strong record of feeding, but also a biased one. Tooth-rich animals can seem more present than they were. Shed teeth may accumulate where feeding happened. A small tooth can travel through sediment differently from a large bone. Even the most useful evidence has to be read in relation to how it entered the rock. Some Morrison animals probably migrated locally or regionally, especially if water and vegetation shifted strongly with season. The evidence for large-scale sauropod migration remains debated, but movement across the basin would have been necessary at least in response to changing resources. Migration need not mean a grand annual march. It can mean practical movement from one workable place to another as conditions tighten or improve. Water sources would have become memory points for animals capable of learning landscapes. Modern animals remember routes, danger zones, and seasonal resources in different ways. We cannot directly measure Morrison dinosaur memory, but repeated movement across habitats would have favored individuals that found water and food efficiently. The ancient floodplain was also a map inside animal behavior. Social behavior is difficult to prove, but trackways and bone accumulations can suggest grouping in some dinosaurs. Sauropods may have moved in groups at times. Ornithopods may have benefited from collective vigilance. Even predators may have tolerated one another around carcasses or certain sites, whether or not they hunted cooperatively. The Morrison likely contained many kinds of social distance, from herd cohesion to wary overlap. A herd is not always a peaceful unit. Animals within groups compete, jostle, follow, lose contact, and respond differently to stress. Young animals may be protected by position rather than intention. Adults may defend only when the behavior benefits them or their offspring. Fossils rarely show the emotional structure of a group, but they can show that bodies moved together and died together in some circumstances. Communication must have existed, though its forms are mostly lost. Body posture, display structures, movement, scent, low sounds, calls, and visual signals could all have played roles depending on animal group. Stegosaur plates may have communicated visually. Sauropod size and posture were signals simply by being visible. Theropods may have used head movements, vocalizations, or body displays. The Jurassic was not mute, even if stone keeps few sounds. The soundscape must be reconstructed with restraint. We do not know exact calls. We can infer that large bodies made low-frequency movement sounds, that insects contributed constant detail, that water and wind shaped the background, that animals capable of vocalization probably used it. But the precise voice of Allosaurus or Diplodocus is beyond us. Silence in reconstruction is sometimes more honest than invented roar. Smell, by contrast, may have been one of the dominant senses for many animals. Carcasses, water, mates, territory, predators, plant chemicals, dung, mud, and seasonal decay all leave scent. The Morrison would have been an olfactory landscape. A mammaliform could follow insect odors. A predator could find carrion. Herbivores could detect water or the presence of others. Deep time had a smell even if we cannot preserve it. Heat-shaped behavior. Large animals absorb and release heat differently from small animals. Sauropods may have faced challenges avoiding overheating in open areas, while small mammals faced heat loss at night and heat stress in exposed daytime conditions. Shade, water, posture, activity timing, and body size all interacted. Climate is not an abstract background. It enters every body through temperature. Fire is possible in any vegetated landscape with dry seasons, lightning, and fuel, though direct Morrison fire evidence varies by locality and must be treated carefully. If fires occurred, they would have opened patches, killed small animals, returned nutrients, and changed plant succession. Even without frequent fire, drought alone could create open ground and stressed vegetation. The floodplain was always being reset by disturbance. Disturbance can increase diversity by creating patches in different stages of recovery. A freshly flooded surface, a young fern bed, a mature conifer stand, a drying pond, a trampled pathway. Animals use these patches differently. The Morrison's seasonal and fluvial disturbance may have helped maintain a mosaic of habitats, allowing many herbivores and smaller animals to coexist. Competition among sauropods is one of the formation's enduring questions. How could so many large herbivores share one region? Feeding height, skull shape, tooth form, gut capacity, habitat preference, and seasonal movement may all have reduced overlap. Coexistence does not require no competition. It requires competition not severe enough to eliminate all but one lineage. Predator competition worked the same way. Allosaurus, Ceratosaurus, Torvosaurus, Marchosaurus, and smaller theropods did not need identical diets. Some may have preferred different prey sizes or habitats. Some may have scavenged more often. Some may have hunted near water. Some may have taken smaller vertebrates. A predator guild can be crowded if each hunter uses the landscape slightly differently. Scavenging is not lesser than hunting. In most ecosystems, scavenging is efficient whenever carcasses are available. A large dead sauropod is too rich a resource to ignore. Predators, small carnivores, insects, crocodiliforms, and microbes all participate. The line between predator and scavenger is often situational. An Allosaurus that hunted yesterday could scavenge today and return to hunting tomorrow. Bone beds may preserve moments when that distinction disappears. A drought weakens herbivores. Predators kill some and scavenge others. Bodies accumulate. Water reworks remains. Later animals trample the site. A fossil assemblage produced by such processes is not one story, but a braid of stories. Reading it requires patience with complexity, rather than a search for one dramatic explanation. The Morrisons' famous animals also entered culture through art. Early restorations placed sauropods in swamps, dragging tails. Later work lifted tails, changed postures, revised body masses, and placed animals in more active terrestrial roles. Each generation painted the Morrison with the science it had. The shifting images are a history of knowledge, not just a history of style. Tail dragging is one of the clearest examples. Old reconstructions often showed dinosaurs leaving heavy tail trails. Trackways generally do not support constant tail dragging for many dinosaurs. Tails were held off the ground in life, used for balance and movement. A simple absence in mud helped correct decades of imagery. Sometimes what is not preserved is evidence too. The same correction applies to sauropod habitat. The old swamp-bound giant could not explain the anatomy or the sedimentary evidence well enough. Morrison sauropods were terrestrial animals moving across floodplains, not helpless bodies buoyed by water. They may have used wet places, of course. All animals use water. But they were not confined to it by their own weight. The Morrison therefore teaches scientific revision at the level of public imagination. Dinosaurs became more active, more ecological, more varied, and more grounded in geology. The formation did not change. Our questions did. This is why returning to old fossils matters. A specimen collected in 1909 can answer a question that nobody had the tools or framework to ask at the time. CT scans can look inside bones without cutting them open. Digital models can test range of motion, stress, and mass distribution. Microwear analysis can examine feeding surfaces. Stable isotope work can compare environmental signals. Phylogenetic analysis can revise relationships. The Morrison is not a finished chapter in old books. It is a data source still responding to new methods. There is also a human geography to the formation. Many Morrison exposures lie on public lands, parklands, private ranches, and places connected to indigenous histories far older than paleontology, but much younger than the rocks. Fossils exist within modern landscapes that have their own meanings, laws, and responsibilities. The ancient world is recovered through the present, and the present shapes how that recovery happens. Protecting fossil sites matters because context can be destroyed quickly. A bone taken without documentation may become an object, but it loses much of its scientific value. Looting, erosion, construction, and careless collecting can all damage the record. The Morrison has given much to science because people preserved, mapped, and studied it. The next discoveries depend on the same care. Education often begins with wonder, and the Morrison supplies wonder easily. A child standing under Diplodocus does not need a lecture to feel scale. But wonder can mature into attention. The same child can later ask what Diplodocus ate, how the river preserved its bones, what smaller animals lived near it, and why no grass grew under its feet. Wonder is the doorway. Evidence is the path beyond it. The phrase Jurassic life beyond the giants could describe that movement from awe to understanding. The giant catches the eye. The ecosystem holds the mind. Once the smaller details become visible, the large animals do not shrink. They become more real because they are no longer alone. They stand inside a functioning world with limits and dependencies. Dependency is one of the Morrison's quiet themes. Predators depend on herbivores. Herbivores depend on plants. Plants depend on water, soil, climate, and reproduction. Scavengers depend on death. Fossilization depends on sediment. Science depends on preservation and careful work. No part of the story exists by itself. The formation is a record of relationships before it is a record of names. Even extinction is relational. When Morrison lineages eventually declined or disappeared, their losses were tied to changing environments, competitors, geography, and broader evolutionary turnover. Few endings are simple. Stegosaurs fading in some regions, sauropod groups shifting, theropod lineages changing, plants transforming in the Cretaceous. The end of a familiar ecosystem is usually many changes arriving at different speeds. A final Morrison scene does not need a catastrophe. It can be a riverbank at dusk, much like the opening, with bones still inside living bodies. The animals do not know that their world will become rock. A Camarasaurus feeds. A turtle slides into water. A small mammal waits under roots. A pterosaur turns its head into the wind. Sediment moves grain by grain toward preservation. Somewhere on that floodplain, a bone that will one day sit in a museum is still warm. Blood moves through it. Muscle pulls against it. Skin covers it. The animal shifts weight and continues forward. Fossils begin as living structures, and remembering that keeps the Morrison from becoming a cabinet of objects. Every specimen was once part of a body that had no interest in being evidence. The body will die, perhaps in drought, perhaps in flood, perhaps from age, injury, disease, or predation. Most of it will vanish. Some bone may remain, if buried quickly enough, if chemistry allows, if later erosion is kind, that bone may return. The odds are narrow, but over millions of lives they become enough. The Morrison is made of enough. And when the bone returns, it does not return alone. It brings with it the channel, the season, the plants, the food web, the climate, the small animals, and the limits of what can be known. That is the gift of formations like Morrison. They let a fragment point outward until a whole lost system begins to take shape. So the next time the Morrison is reduced to its giants, hold the larger image a little longer. Keep Diplodocus, Apatosaurus, Brachiosaurus, and Camarasaurus in the frame. Keep Allosaurus and Stegosaurus too. Then lower the view to the mud, to the turtle shell, to the mammal tooth, to the root trace, to the insect over water. The Jurassic becomes wider there. The quarry wall waits in the same patience with which it has always waited. Dust gathers. Light changes. Visitors pass. Scientists measure. New questions return to old bones. Behind the ribs and vertebrae, the floodplain remains folded into stone. Not a land of monsters only, and not a museum fantasy, but a complete ancient place, built from water, heat, hunger, growth, death, and the small lives that made the giants possible. There is another way to enter the Morrison, not through a skeleton, but through a handful of sediment washed through screens. The large stones are removed first, then smaller grains. Then the residue is examined for teeth, scales, tiny jaws, vertebrae, and fragments that would never be seen by walking a badland slope. This method turns the formation inside out. It finds the small world hidden inside the rock that early collectors often passed over because their eyes were trained on museum giants. Screenwashing can make a single locality feel suddenly crowded. A pinch of concentrate may hold fish scales, amphibian bones, lizard jaws, mammal teeth, and bits of turtle shell. None of these pieces would dominate a gallery, but together they describe the base and middle layers of the food web. They prove that the floodplain was not empty between dinosaur footsteps. It was alive at the scale of grains. The Frita area in Colorado is especially important for this smaller record. It has produced mammals, lizards, crocodiliforms, and small dinosaurs that expand the Morrison beyond the classic quarry giants. The name Fruta appears in animals such as Frutafossor and Frutidens, but the greater significance is ecological. Localities like this show that the Morrison was full of small-bodied specialists, and that our picture changes when collection methods become fine enough to catch them. Frutidens is sometimes described as one of the smallest known ornithischian dinosaurs. That fact can sound like a novelty, but it matters more as ecology. Small dinosaur bodies could move through spaces that sauropods never used directly. They could feed among low plants, avoid larger animals, and reproduce on a scale very different from the giants. The Morrison's dinosaur diversity therefore extended from hall-filling skeletons to animals that could disappear in understory shadows. Fruitifossor, with digging adaptations, brings the formation even closer to the soil. Its forelimbs and body suggest an animal that could work into earth or decaying wood, perhaps after insects or other small prey. If a sauropod represents the canopy and open floodplain, Fruitifossor represents the ground's hidden interior. One animal stretches the vertical reach of feeding. The other enters the surface beneath everyone else's feet. Docodonts and other mammaliaforms show that teeth had already become complex tools in the Jurassic night. Their molars were not simple reptile teeth replaced without much specialization. They carried cusps and basins suited to particular food processing. This dental complexity is one reason mammals could occupy narrow feeding niches while remaining small. In a world where size was denied to them, precision became a form of opportunity. It is easy to call Jurassic mammals primitive, but the word can mislead. They were not incomplete versions of later mammals. They were successful animals adapted to their own constraints. A small nocturnal insectivore in the Morrison did not need to become a horse, whale, or primate to justify its existence. It needed to keep warm, find food, avoid predators, and reproduce under the enormous shadow of dinosaurs. Mammalian hearing may have opened a different Morrison at night. Small bones in the middle ear allowed sensitivity to sounds that many reptiles may not have detected in the same way. A rustle under litter, the scrape of an insect, the movement of a small predator, the approach of a larger body through vegetation. The nighttime floodplain was not simply darker. It was organized by different senses. Whiskers, if present as they are in modern mammals and inferred in many early forms, would have made close spaces readable. A burrow wall, a root tangle, the edge of a log, the body of prey in darkness. Tactile information matters when eyes are limited. The Morrison's smallest warm-blooded animals may have inhabited a world of touch and smell as much as sight. The same undergrowth that protected small mammals also protected their predators. A small theropod did not need open pursuit if it could move through cover. A lizard could wait beside a root. A crocodiliform hatchling or small species could slip between water and bank. The low Morrison world was full of ambush points at scales too small for a sauropod to notice. Lizards and sphenodontians may have used temperature patches with great care. A sunny piece of exposed mud. A warm stone. The shaded base of a cycad. Thermoregulation is behavior as much as physiology. A small reptile's day can be mapped by heat, and the Morrison's seasonal climate would have made microhabitats important. Even in a warm world, the difference between shade and sun could decide movement. Amphibians remind us that the formation's dryness was never absolute. A salamander cannot survive a landscape without damp refuge. A frog cannot complete its life cycle without water. Their fossils indicate local conditions where moisture persisted at least long enough. They mark the wet seams in a semi-arid world. The places where the basin held onto water after exposed ground had already begun to crack. A frog's call, if heard in a Morrison wet season, would not be preserved, but its presence can be inferred from bones and habitat. It would have belonged to a chorus older than grasses and flowers, sounded under conifers and ferns, near pools used by animals of many sizes. The ordinary sound of amphibians can make a prehistoric world feel less empty and more ecological. Turtles often carry an impression of timelessness, but they too evolved, diversified, and occupied specific habitats. Morrison turtles such as Glyptops and Dinocheles show that shell-bearing reptiles were well established in these floodplain waters. Their shells helped them survive some threats, but not all. A turtle could be crushed, bitten, stranded, or buried. Armor changes the terms of danger. It does not remove danger. Crocodiliform diversity in the Morrison is easy to underestimate because modern crocodilians offer such a strong template. But Jurassic forms were not restricted to the modern pattern. Some were more terrestrial. Some were smaller and more agile. Some occupied aquatic margins. They were part of an evolutionary radiation experimenting with body plans long before later crocodilian diversity narrowed toward the forms we know today. A small terrestrial crocodiliform running across a dry patch would surprise anyone expecting every crocodile relative to weight in water. The Morrison held such surprises. Evolution had not yet reduced these reptiles to a single popular image. They could be low hunters on land, armored shapes near channels, or semi-aquatic predators in pools. The word crocodile is too simple for the Mesozoic. Fish in the Morrison waterways connected the basin to older aquatic lineages. Lungfish, ray-finned fish, and other forms inhabited channels and ponds depending on locality. Their scales and bones can tell us about water bodies that might otherwise be seen only through sediment. A fish fossil places depth, oxygen, food, and connection into the reconstruction. Water becomes habitat, not just a feature beside dinosaurs. Freshwater clams and snails make the same point more quietly. Their shells mark the chemistry and persistence of water. They lived in sediment, filtered, grazed, reproduced, and died in channels or ponds. Large dinosaurs may have walked through their habitat without awareness, but these invertebrates helped define the living bottom of Morrison waters. The ecosystem extended downward into mud. Ostracods, tiny crustaceans with small bivalved shells, are even less visible to ordinary imagination, yet they can be useful indicators of ancient water conditions. Their presence, species, and abundance may help reconstruct salinity, permanence, and environmental shifts. A dinosaur bone gives scale. An ostracod gives subtlety. Both can belong to the same formation, but they ask different questions of the past. The Morrison's plants were not only food, they were structure. Conifer trunks made vertical barriers, fallen logs made shelter. Fern beds made cover for small animals and feeding for herbivores. Root systems stabilized banks. Plant communities influenced where sediment settled and where water flowed. To reconstruct the dinosaurs without the plants is to remove the architecture of their lives. Bennettitalians, often mentioned less than cycads and conifers, were important Mesozoic seed plants with a superficially cycad-like appearance in some forms. Their reproductive structures have long interested paleobotanists because they hint at complex plant-insect interactions before true flowers transformed the world. In the Morrison, such plants add another layer to the non-flowering botanical diversity that sustained the animals. Seed ferns, where present in the broader Morrison flora, represent another older plant experiment. They are not ferns in the modern reproductive sense, but seed-bearing plants with fern-like foliage. Their history reaches back before the Jurassic, and by Morrison time, many of their once dominant lineages had already declined. A fragment of such foliage can carry a long evolutionary past into a dinosaur-bearing rock. Plant identification from fragments can be difficult. A leaf impression may preserve shape, but not every diagnostic structure. Wood may identify broader groups better than exact species. Pollen and spores, when available, add another record. Paleobotany often works through partial signals, much like vertebrate paleontology does. A forest is reconstructed from pieces small enough to seem unimpressive until they are assembled. Without grasses, the ground surface itself would have behaved differently. Grass roots bind soil in ways that later changed erosion and herbivore feeding. Morrison floodplains had other plants holding surfaces, but not the dense grass mats familiar from modern plains. Mud, bare patches, fern cover, leaf litter, and open sediment would have created a different walking and feeding environment for animals. This absence affects how we imagine herds. A sauropod moving across a fern-rich open area is not crossing a grass savanna. Its feet press into different vegetation, different root structures, different soil. The visual comparison to modern elephants on plains can help with scale, but it should not replace the Jurassic particulars. Analogies are useful only until they start erasing the thing they explain. The Morrison's semi-arid seasonality also suggests that many plants grew in pulses. After rains, low vegetation may have expanded rapidly. During dry intervals, growth slowed and water-dependent patches retreated. Herbivores following food would respond to this uneven productivity. A landscape that appears sparse at one point in the year may have been abundant weeks earlier. Fossils capture outcomes, not always the seasonal motion that produced them. Large herbivore feeding could create open lanes through vegetation. Repeated travel to water might harden paths, compact soil, and concentrate dung. Modern mega-herbivores shape landscapes this way, and while Morrison plants and animals were different, the physics of large bodies moving repeatedly through vegetation still applies. A sauropod trail could become part of the floodplain's practical geography. Those trails might then influence smaller animals. A clear path can be a route for quick movement, but also a danger corridor where predators search. A footprint can hold water. Broken branches can shelter insects. What begins as mega-herbivore disturbance becomes habitat modification at smaller scales. The giant and the small are connected through consequences neither one intends. Allosaurus remains abundant enough in some deposits that it has become the default Morrison predator, but abundance itself invites questions. Was it truly more common on the living landscape, or more likely to die in preservable settings? Did its behavior bring it repeatedly to hazardous places, such as carcass sites or drought pools? The answer may include both ecology and preservation. A common fossil can be both a common animal and a commonly trapped animal. Ceratosaurus, with its deeper tail and different skull ornamentation, offers a contrast. It may have hunted or scavenged in somewhat different settings, perhaps using river margins more often, though such ideas require caution. Its coexistence with Allosaurus suggests that Morrison predators partitioned resources enough to persist together. Even large carnivores need ecological separation if they share a basin for long periods. Torvosaurus appears rarer, but rarity can signal many things. A larger territory, smaller population size, different habitat preference, preservation bias, limited sampling. The animal's robust jaws and body mark it as a formidable predator, but its ecological role is still reconstructed from incomplete evidence. The Morrison has famous names, but fame does not make every detail known. Marriosaurus and Stokesaurus, smaller than the apex predators, help fill the middle of the predator guild. Such animals may have targeted prey too small for Allosaurus to pursue efficiently, or too large for the smallest hunters. Mid-sized predators are important because they connect food web levels. They can take juvenile dinosaurs, small ornithopods, reptiles, mammals, and carrion, depending on opportunity. Ornitholestes remains one of the classic small Morrison theropods, though many details of its appearance and habits have been revised or debated. It likely did not live as a miniature version of a giant predator. Its body size gave it a different world. Closer cover, smaller prey, faster turns, and perhaps more frequent use of insects and small vertebrates. Small carnivory is not a lesser story. It is a different one. Coelurus and related slender-bodied forms deepen this small predator picture. Their fossils are less complete than many would like, but the animals they represent were part of the living scene. A floodplain with only Allosaurus would be ecologically strange. A floodplain with multiple predator sizes is far more believable because prey size itself is varied. Ornithopods, too, were not a single category. Camptosaurus, Dryosaurus, Nanosaurus, and Frutodons represent different body sizes and likely different feeding strategies. Some could process plants more effectively than others. Some relied more on speed. Some may have lived in groups. Together they show that herbivorous dinosaur diversity beneath the sauropod tier was rich and important. Nanosaurus, long tangled in taxonomic history, reminds us that small ornithischians can be difficult to classify from fragmentary material. Names change as bones are restudied. Specimens once separated may be combined, or combined specimens separated again. This is not instability for its own sake. It reflects the challenge of reading small. incomplete skeletons in a formation where large animals have traditionally drawn more attention. Camptosaurus is often overshadowed by Stegosaurus and the sauropods, but it may have been one of the more ecologically important herbivores. Medium-sized animals can be numerous, mobile, and heavily preyed upon. They turn plant matter into meat for predators more efficiently than enormous adults do. A food web needs such animals. They are the everyday prey that makes apex predators sustainable. Dryosaurus, lighter and faster, fills another version of that role. Its long legs suggest quick escape, but escape only works when danger is noticed soon enough. The animal's life may have depended on feeding in places with enough visibility, staying near others, or using cover without becoming trapped by it. Speed is useful, but it is always part of a broader survival strategy. Stegosaurs show that defense can be visual and physical at once. Plates may have made individuals more visible to one another, perhaps signaling species, maturity, or condition. Tail spikes made approach dangerous. The combination created an animal that communicated and defended with the same general silhouette. In the Morrison, the line between display and survival may have been thin. Early ankylosaurs in the Morrison point toward a future where armor would become even more elaborate. Gargoyleosaurus and Maiorapelta were not yet the heavily club-tailed tanks of later Cretaceous ecosystems, but they show that body armor was already a successful experiment. Evolution does not leap directly to a final iconic form. It builds through intermediate solutions that work well enough in their own time. Pterosaurs such as Mesodactylus and Harpactognathus are known from Morrison material and help show that the sky above the basin had more than one kind of flying reptile. Their fossils are limited, but their presence matters. They may have hunted insects, fish, or other small prey, and some may have scavenged. A carcass on an open floodplain could attract not only ground predators, but also watchful shapes from above. A flying animal experiences the Morrison as a pattern of lines and openings. Channels reflect light. Trees cluster where water stays near the surface. Carcasses mark pale shapes on darker ground. Herds become movement across open flats. From above, the floodplain is not the same maze faced by a small mammal or a turtle. Flight creates a different map of opportunity. Early birds are not a major Morrison story in the same way Archaeopteryx is a Solnhofen story. But the broader late Jurassic world was already approaching the origin and early diversification of avialans. This matters because the Morrison existed during the time when feathers, flight experiments, and small theropod diversity were reshaping the boundary between ground and sky. The sky was changing, even if the Morrison record preserves that change only faintly. Feathers themselves may have existed on some small theropods related to groups outside the Morrison record, and many paleontologists consider filamentous or feather-like coverings widespread in parts of theropod evolution. For Morrison species, direct evidence is limited, so reconstructions should be careful. Some animals may have carried feathers or filaments, others may not. The safest voice is one that allows possibility without turning it into certainty. Color is even harder. We can imagine patterns, countershading, display colors, dull camouflage, flushed tissues, or seasonal changes, but most Morrison animals preserve no direct color evidence. This does not mean they were gray by default. It means the rock is mostly silent on the subject. A restrained reconstruction lets skin and feather colors remain plausible rather than pretending the palette is known. The Morrison's silence on sound and color is balanced by its strength in bone, sediment, and distribution. Every fossil formation has gifts and absences. Solnhofen gives feathers and membranes. Morrison gives abundance of large terrestrial vertebrates and broad ecosystem scale. Tendaguru gives another continental comparison. No single formation tells the whole Jurassic. Together, they let the period become dimensional. Because the Morrison is so famous, it can sometimes feel overfamiliar. The same names repeat until they become almost decorative. But each familiar name points back to a living animal with unresolved questions. How exactly did Diplodocus feed across seasons? How did juvenile Allosaurus differ in diet from adults? How often did stegosaurs use tail spikes? How did small mammals divide nighttime niches? Familiarity should invite closer looking, not finality. The phrase Morrison ecosystem also includes bacteria and fungi, though they rarely leave clear fossils. Decomposition, soil formation, digestion, disease, and nutrient cycling all depended on microbial life. Sauropod guts likely contained complex communities for fermenting plant matter. Carcasses returned to the system through microbial work. Even the formation of some mineral conditions involved chemistry shaped by microscopic processes. The unseen majority helped run the world. Gut microbes in herbivores are especially important. Tough gymnosperm foliage would have required fermentation and long digestive processing. A sauropod's body was not only an animal body, it was a moving chamber for microbial collaboration. Without microbes, much plant energy remains locked away. The largest dinosaurs depended on some of the smallest forms of life to turn leaves into growth. Soil microbes and fungi likewise made plant growth possible by recycling nutrients and interacting with roots. A conifer forest is never only trunks and leaves. It is underground exchange, decay, mineral movement, and water retention. The Morrison's plant communities rested on these hidden systems. The fossil record rarely shows them directly, but ecology requires them. This hidden biological infrastructure makes the Morrison feel less like a collection of vanished celebrities and more like a complete world. The visible animals were the upper surfaces of deeper processes. Sunlight became plant tissue. Plant tissue became herbivore mass. Herbivore mass became predator tissue, eggs, dung, carcasses, microbes, sediment chemistry, and eventually fossils. Energy moved through forms, and the rocks caught only some of them. A modern visitor to Morrison exposures may hear wind, traffic, or the voices of other visitors. The Jurassic sound is gone, yet the rock still controls the imagination by refusing to be vague. It gives a color, a grain, a bone orientation, a locality. The past becomes more powerful when it is attached to place. Not somewhere long ago, but this layer, this slope, this quarry wall. Place is why formations matter. A dinosaur species without its formation is a name floating in time. A formation gives it neighbors, climate, sediment, plants, and a map. Allosaurus in the Morrison is not just Allosaurus. It is Allosaurus among sauropods, stegosaurs, ornithopods, crocodiliforms, turtles, mammals, ferns. Droughts and flood channels. Place restores consequence. The Morrison Formation also reminds us that geological names are human handles on natural continuities. Rock units begin and end where geologists recognize changes, but ancient landscapes did not know those boundaries. Sediment continued from one environment to another, from one basin to the next, from Jurassic into Cretaceous transitions. Names help us study, but nature was always less tidy than the map. That untidiness is part of the beauty. A quarry may contain bones from animals that died in different seasons. A layer may include sediment from storms, quiet water, and reworked older material. A fossil may be complete in one part and missing in another because scavengers, weather, or transport intervened. The Morrison is not a preserved painting. It is a preserved process. Process continues today as erosion opens new surfaces. Every year, weather reveals and destroys fossils. A bone exposed too long can crack, flake, and disappear. Fieldwork is therefore partly a race against modern erosion. The ancient burial saved the fossil for millions of years, but once exposed, it becomes vulnerable again. Discovery is also rescue. In a sense, the Morrison has two deaths: the death of the animal in the Jurassic and the potential death of the fossil at the modern surface. Between them lies deep burial, mineral replacement, uplift, erosion, discovery, and care. This long chain makes each specimen improbable. It also makes careless loss more serious because the chain cannot be repeated. The best Morrison science combines awe with discipline. Awe gets people into the field, into museums, into questions. Discipline keeps the answers grounded. Without awe, the work can become only measurement. Without discipline, it becomes fantasy. The formation deserves both, the feeling of standing beside a giant rib and the patience to ask what the mud around it means. For Jurassical, the Morrison is a natural subject because it contains the classic image of the Jurassic and then breaks it open. The giants are there, but so are the details that make them believable. A long-form journey through this formation should not hurry from one famous animal to another. It should slow down at the bank, the root, the tooth, the track, the wound, the small jaw under the microscope. The final image can return to the quarry not because the quarry is the whole world, but because it is where the world becomes visible. A rib in sandstone, a vertebra beside another animal's limb, mudstone around them. Human light falling across Jurassic remains. The quarry is a meeting point between living floodplain and modern attention. Behind the quarry wall, the ancient day remains unreachable. No one will stand there as the rain begins, or watch the first animal cross fresh mud, or hear the insects over the channel. But the evidence narrows the distance. It does not bring the past back completely. It brings it back enough to recognize that it was full, specific, and alive far beyond the giants. The Morrison Formation endures because it offers both scale and intimacy. It can make a person feel small beside a sauropod femur, then make that same person lean close to see a mammal tooth. It expands and contracts the imagination. It teaches that deep time is not only vastness, it is detail preserved against impossible odds. When the last light leaves the floodplain in imagination, the small animals begin again. A mammaliform moves along roots, a turtle settles underwater, a crocodiliform waits in the margin. A pterosaur folds its wings. Far off, giants continue feeding among dark conifers. The scene does not end with a roar. It continues with the ordinary persistence of life. Then, sediment falls, season after season, until the living surface is gone. The river changes course. The basin fills. The Jurassic passes into later worlds. Mountains rise long afterward. Erosion opens the stone. A rib appears. A person notices. The formation speaks not in one voice, but in bones, leaves, teeth, tracks, and grains, each carrying one part of the world that made the giants possible. And if the rib is followed carefully, it leads away from itself. Into the plants that fed the body, into the small animals that shared the bank, into the water that buried the remains, into the dry season that concentrated life, into the science that reads stone without pretending to know more than it can. The Morrison's greatest gift is not only that it preserves giants, it preserves the world around them. One reason the Morrison holds attention is that it makes the Jurassic West feel almost reachable, while still refusing to become modern. The place has rivers, forests, drought, mud, insects, and animal paths. These are familiar categories. But the trees are not the trees of a modern park, the herbivores are not mammals, the air holds no grass pollen, and the most common large bodies belong to lineages that vanished, except for birds. Recognition and alienness sit together. A person walking a modern Morrison outcrop may see sagebrush, desert varnish, cliffs, and blue sky. None of that is the Jurassic surface. The ancient world has to be rebuilt downward, through erosion, through uplift, through the removal of later time. The modern landscape is not a preserved diorama, it is the exposed remainder of a buried basin that has passed through mountain building and millions of years of weather. This creates a strange double vision. The same place can be dry today and still preserve evidence of Jurassic river systems. It can hold a visitor's bootprint in dust above a sauropod bone that once lay in wet sediment. Fieldwork often lives inside this double image, reading the ancient environment while standing in the modern one. The past is not visible all at once. it has to be separated from what came after. The animals themselves also require double vision. A mounted Camarasaurus is a fossil object, but it points to a living herbivore with organs and behavior. A tooth in a drawer is a specimen number, but it points to a feeding event. A track surface is rock, but it points to movement. Paleontology is the practice of letting evidence remain physical, while also understanding what physical evidence once was. Because the Morrison is so large an area, it also asks for geographic humility. A fossil from Wyoming and one from New Mexico may both be Morrison, but they do not automatically represent the same local habitat or the same year. Distance mattered then, as it does now. Rivers drained different areas. Rainfall varied. Local plant communities differed. The formation is unified by geology, but life within it was regional. That regional variation may explain why some dinosaurs are abundant in one area and scarce in another. It may reflect genuine habitat preference, not only preservation. A sauropod suited to certain vegetation might appear where that vegetation was common. A predator may follow prey concentrations. A turtle may be tied to more permanent water. Locality data turns a fossil list into a map of preferences. Maps of fossil localities therefore become more than dots. They show the unevenness of ancient life and the unevenness of modern discovery. Roads, erosion, land access, collecting history, and research interest all affect where fossils are found. A blank area on a map may mean the animal was absent, or it may mean the rocks are covered, inaccessible, eroded away, or not yet searched carefully. In the Morrison, absence must always be handled gently. The absence of a small animal from a quarry does not prove it was absent from the living ecosystem. The absence of plant fossils in a bed does not mean no plants grew nearby. The absence of skin does not mean the animal lacked skin texture. The rock speaks, but it does not speak every sentence. This is why the most trustworthy reconstructions often sound less certain than the most exciting ones. They say probably, may have, suggests, appears to, is consistent with. These words do not weaken the image. They show where the image touches evidence and where it steps beyond it. A cautious Morrison is not a dull Morrison. It is a believable one. Believability also comes from resisting the urge to make every moment violent. Predation was real, but most animals spent most of their time doing other things. Feeding, resting, moving, warming, cooling, watching, growing, recovering, choosing. A floodplain made only of attacks would not be an ecosystem. It would be a trailer. The Morrison was more patient than that. A sauropod feeding for hours can be as important as a theropod strike. The feeding changes vegetation, fuels growth, produces dung, moves seeds or spores indirectly, and keeps the herbivore alive for another day. A turtle basking is regulating temperature. A mammal hiding is surviving. These ordinary actions are the quiet machinery of the formation's life. Even death, when it came, was often ordinary. An old animal failing in dry heat, a juvenile separated from cover, a turtle stranded as a pond shrank, a fish trapped in warm water, a predator infected after a wound. Catastrophe did occur, especially in floods and droughts, but much of the fossil record may begin with very common biological endings. The later drama belongs partly to burial. Sediment covers the remains. Minerals move through pore spaces. Organic structures decay or are replaced. Pressure builds. Time passes beyond intuition. The dead animal is no longer an animal, but not yet a fossil in the way we will recognize. It is becoming part of the rock record through processes slow enough to erase any human sense of event. When uplift eventually raises the region and erosion cuts into it, the fossil begins a second exposure. The bone that once had to be buried quickly must now be revealed slowly enough to be found. Too little erosion, and it remains hidden. Too much, and it is destroyed. Discovery depends on a narrow balance at both ends of fossil history: burial in the Jurassic exposure in the present. The Morrison's gift is that this balance happened many times, not for most animals, but for enough. Enough sauropods to study growth and diversity, enough theropods to examine injury and abundance, enough stegosaurs to revise armor arrangement, enough small vertebrates to reveal hidden communities, enough plants and sediments to rebuild habitat. The formation is not complete, but it is generous. Generosity can create its own challenge. With so many fossils, the temptation is to rush. Another species, another quarry, another famous skeleton. But the deeper story needs pauses. A single mudstone bed deserves attention. A single small jaw deserves attention. A single healed wound deserves attention. The Morrison becomes richer when it is not treated as a checklist. The same patience applies to names. Diplodocus, Apatosaurus, Brontosaurus, Barosaurus, Supersaurus, Camarasaurus, Brachiosaurus. The names accumulate quickly, and the mind can blur them into one category of long-necked giant. But each name represents anatomical differences, possible ecological differences, and a history of discovery. Diversity is not simply many labels. It is many ways of inhabiting a world. Among the sauropods, skulls are especially precious because they are less commonly preserved than the robust limb and vertebral elements. A skull can reveal feeding mechanics, tooth form, eye position, and muscle attachment. It can change an animal from a long-necked outline into a particular herbivore. When a sauropod skull is missing, the body remains impressive, but the diet becomes harder to read. Among theropods, skulls carry the violence and nuance of feeding. Tooth shape, jaw depth, openings in the bone, muscle scars, and bite mechanics all matter. Allosaurus did not bite like Tyrannosaurus, and the difference is important. The Morrison predator lived in its own time, with its own prey and its own biomechanical limits. Later dinosaurs should not be used to overwrite it. Among stegosaurs and ankylosaurs, armor pieces can move after death and be found out of life position. This makes articulated or associated specimens especially valuable. A plate in isolation tells less than a skeleton with armor preserved in place. Arrangement matters. Without it, reconstructions can become educated puzzles. With it, the animal's silhouette becomes better grounded. For turtles and crocodiliforms, skull and shell material can reveal aquatic versus terrestrial habits, feeding style, and lineage. These animals may not dominate popular attention, but they help identify habitat. A turtle-rich layer may point toward water permanence. A crocodiliform assemblage can suggest the kinds of predators operating along the margins. Small fossils often tell environmental truths that large bones cannot. For plants, a leaf bed can speak to season and setting. Leaves may collect in quiet water, blow into channels, or settle under trees. Their preservation can indicate transport or local growth. A concentration of plant material may represent a flood event, a pond margin, or a forest floor buried under sediment. Paleobotany reads the ancient landscape through fallen pieces. The Morrison's non-flowering forests also change how we imagine shade. Conifer canopies filter light differently from broadleaf flowering forests. Cycad and fern understories create different textures and gaps. The light on a dinosaur's body would have passed through needles, fronds, and stiff leaves rather than maple or oak foliage. Even shadow was Jurassic in its own way. Water reflection would have shown unfamiliar silhouettes. A pterosaur crossing, a conifer crown, the low back of a crocodiliform, the head of a turtle, the legs of a sauropod moving near the bank. The surface might hold pollen, dust, insect bodies, plant fragments, and the disturbance of fish below. A small pool can contain an entire vertical slice of the ecosystem. A dry pool, later, tells the opposite story. Cracked mud, concentrated bones, mineral crusts perhaps, tracks pressed into surfaces that harden and split, plants retreating to deeper moisture. Animals forced elsewhere. The same location can be abundance and absence depending on time of year. The Morrison is best imagined as a sequence, not a still image. The sequence continues over lifetimes. A young conifer grows near a channel. It is browsed, survives, thickens, casts more shade, drops branches, and eventually falls. During its life, generations of small animals use it. Dinosaurs pass under or around it. Floods expose its roots. When it dies, it becomes food and structure. A single plant can organize a small neighborhood for decades. A sauropod might outlive many smaller animals, but it too is temporary. Its path through the basin is long from the perspective of insects, brief from the perspective of the formation. Its bones, if preserved, will outlast the body by a factor the living animal could never need to understand. Deep time turns temporary lives into enduring evidence by removing almost everything else. That removal is why every reconstruction should feel slightly incomplete at the edges. The unknown is not a flaw. It is the atmosphere of paleontology. We know enough to see rivers, plants, animals, climate, and death. We do not know every color, call, gesture, root, or relationship. The Morrison remains partly dark, and that darkness is honest. Still, the darkness is not emptiness. It is filled with plausible life, constrained by evidence. A small mammal under roots is not invented from nothing. It is supported by mammaliform fossils and ecological need. A fern-rich bank is supported by plant remains and sediment. A drought concentration is supported by geology and taphonomy. Imagination works best when it follows the tracks already present. The final value of the Morrison may be that it makes deep time ecological rather than merely chronological. It is not only a date range, it is a set of relationships preserved in stone. Once those relationships become visible, the Jurassic is no longer a parade of species. It is a living system, with all the dependency, uncertainty, and resilience that living systems have. The rib in the quarry wall remains a good place to end because it is both simple and inexhaustible. It is one bone, one curve in sandstone. But it opens into a chest, a body, a herd or solitary movement, a floodplain, a plant community, a food web, a climate, a burial event, a modern discovery. The smallest visible edge can lead outward into the whole formation. Around that rib, the giants return to their proper size, enormous, but not alone. Impressive, but dependent. Central to the first glance, but surrounded by lives that make the glance worth extending. The Morrison Formation is not diminished when the view widens. It becomes more complete. So the last image is not a battle and not a procession of giants. It is a surface of stone under quiet light, holding a bone that once moved with breath. Somewhere inside the same vanished world were ferns, turtles, insects, small mammals, crocodiliforms, pterosaurs, armored bodies, swift feet, hungry jaws, and water passing over mud. The giants are still there. But now, the world is there with them. The stone keeps waiting. It has waited through burial, uplift, erosion, discovery, and the slow changes of human understanding. It does not need to speak loudly. A rib, a tooth, a track, a leaf, a shell, a grain of sediment are enough. Follow them carefully, and the Morrison opens beyond the giants into the ordinary, immense life of the Jurassic floodplain. One more detail belongs near the end. The Morrison is not only a scientific subject, but a reminder that ancient ecosystems had no awareness of their future fame. The animals did not arrange themselves for museums. They did not live as representatives of a period. Their bones became symbols only after death, burial, discovery, and human imagination. In life, they belonged only to the day in front of them. A Camarasaurus feeding near a channel may have cared about nothing beyond reachable plants, the position of other bodies, the heat, and the next drink of water. That narrowness is not a weakness. It is the way most life is lived. Paleontology looks backward and sees patterns. but the animal lived forward, without knowing which patterns it was part of. The same is true of the smallest insect on the bank. It did not exist to support a food web diagram, though it did. It did not exist to feed a mammal, though it might. It lived through its own senses, its own brief needs. The Morrison becomes more humane, in a broad sense, when every scale of life is allowed its own immediacy. This immediacy helps avoid turning the formation into scenery for giants. A turtle settling into mud is not background. A plant growing after flood is not background. A crocodiliform wading underwater is not background. They are all centers of experience from their own positions. The giants are only one way the Morrison knew itself. Of course, the rock does not preserve experience. It preserves matter and traces. That is the boundary we cannot cross. But by respecting the boundary, we make better use of what remains. We do not have to claim to know thoughts or emotions. We can reconstruct conditions, pressures, possible behaviors, and the physical world in which those behaviors made sense. A careful script about the Morrison should therefore move like fieldwork. Notice something large, kneel for something small. Look at the sediment. Return to the larger landscape. Compare, revise, leave some space open. The rhythm of understanding is not a straight march from fact to fact. It is a repeated widening and narrowing of attention. The formation rewards that rhythm because every scale leads to another. A bone leads to a body leads to a population leads to habitat. Habitat leads to climate leads to geography leads back to the rock. Nothing stays isolated once it is questioned for long enough. Even a single word like floodplain becomes richer under that attention. It means channels, levees, crevasse splays, ponds, soils, vegetation patches, mud cracks, overbank deposits, animal crossings, drought refuges, and sudden burial. It means a landscape built by water that was not always present. It means change as the basic condition of life. The Morrison animals were adapted not to a perfectly stable world, but to one that moved. Rivers moved. Seasons moved. Herds moved. Predators moved behind prey. Plants recovered, failed, and returned. The formation's permanence in stone can hide the mobility of the living system. The rock is still because everything in it once changed. There is comfort in that, though it is not a simple comfort. Change did not spare individuals. It killed, stressed, separated, and buried them. But change also created habitats, renewed plant growth, opened niches, and made preservation possible. The same flood that ended some lives kept evidence of them. The Morrison is built from that difficult exchange. By widening the view beyond the giants, the Jurassic becomes less distant rather than more. Not because it becomes modern, but because it becomes ecological. We understand hunger, water, shelter, growth, injury, and season. The bodies are strange. The plants are strange. The time is vast. But the relationships have a logic that living worlds still share. A bird outside a modern window is a distant survivor of dinosaur history, but the Morrison's connection to the present is also geological and ecological. Rivers still bury. Drought still concentrates life. Floods still rearrange bones. Small animals still live below the attention given to large ones. The ancient world is gone, but some patterns of life and earth remain recognizable. That recognition should be handled gently. The Morrison is not a mirror of the present. It is a separate world with its own plants, animals, climate, and geography. Yet by studying it, we learn how ecosystems can function under different conditions, how diversity is structured, how preservation filters reality, and how life answers constraints with many solutions at once. The final return is to the rib, because a rib is built for breath. In the quarry wall, it no longer moves, but its shape still implies the body it once helped open and close. Around that vanished breath was a floodplain full of other breathing bodies, some immense, some small enough to hide under leaves. The Morrison Formation holds them together in stone. Follow the curve of that rib, and the eye eventually leaves the giant. It moves to the mudstone around it, to the channel that buried it, to the plants that fed it, to the animals that crossed its world unseen. This is where the Morrison becomes whole, not at the size of the largest skeleton, but at the scale of the ecosystem that made such a skeleton possible. A final caution remains in the stone. Every reconstruction is provisional. New fossils can change an animal's posture, diet, relationships, or range. New dates can shift the order of events. A small specimen can alter a whole group. The Morrison has already changed many times under scientific attention, and it will change again. That openness is not a weakness. It is the reason the formation still feels alive as a subject. What should stay steady is the habit of returning to evidence. The quarry wall, the track surface, the plant bed, the screen-washed tooth, the sedimentary layer. These are the anchors. They keep the narration close to rock, close to bodies, close to the physical traces that survived. Without them, the Jurassic becomes mood. With them, it becomes a world. The Morrison world was never only enormous. It was crowded, seasonal, uneven, and specific. Its greatness lies not simply in the size of its sauropods, but in the fact that those sauropods lived among so many other forms of life. The giants were possible because the smaller systems worked: plants growing, insects feeding, water returning, microbes digesting, soils forming, prey surviving long enough to feed predators. So the last view widens and lowers at the same time. The rib remains in the sandstone. Above it in imagination, a giant once breathed. Around it, small feet crossed damp ground, fern leaves opened, turtles moved through pools, and insects rose in warm air. The Morrison Formation is most powerful when the giant bone does not end the story, but begins it. Then, the light fades from the quarry face. The stone keeps its shapes. The rib, the mud, the hidden fragments, and the lost floodplain hold still together. What remains is not a single animal, but an ancient living place, patient in rock, waiting for every careful glance that looks beyond the giants.